So hey, what's up guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel Cosmic Harry, and I really welcome all of you to this channel. So before we move on to the story, I really want to thank all of you who are supporting this channel. It really means a lot. So today we are going to see a crossover between Harry Potter and Omni-Man. So this will be the first crossover between Harry Potter and Omni-Man. So if you're new to this channel, please make sure to subscribe and like the video. Also press that bell notification to also whenever I post video you get the notification first. So the title will be, what if Harry Potter had Viltrumite blood and was raised by Omni-Man? Now without any further delay, let's get straight to the video.
The boy who wouldn't bend by the time Harry Potter was 8 years old, Vernon Dursley, had learned two important facts. The first was that shouting didn't work. The second was that hitting definitely didn't. He learned the second one in the kitchen. It had started the way these things always started, with Dudley crying like the world had ended and Petunia flapping around him in outrage. "He pushed him," she snapped. One bony hand pressed dramatically to Dudley's shoulder. "Vernon, are you hearing this? He pushed Dutters down the stairs." Harry stood near the back door in his too short sleeves and looked from one of them to the other with the flat, unimpressed expression Vernon hated most. The boy had his mother's eyes. Vernon had always hated that. But the rest of him felt wrong in ways Vernon could never put into words that didn't sound insane. At 8, Harry wasn't broad. He wasn't big. He looked wiry, almost underfed. Then he moved and none of that mattered. Dudley sniffled wetly. "He threw me." "I did not," Harry said. "You fell because you came at me like an idiot." Vernon took one heavy step forward. "How dare you speak to us that way?" Harry didn't back up. That had been the problem from the start. The boy never backed up. Not from yelling, not from punishments, not from locked doors. Once, when Vernon had nailed his cupboard shut after Harry came home from school with another story about an accident, Harry had simply kicked the door off the hinges and carried it into the sitting room like a shield. He'd been 6. Now he just stood there, scar visible under his messy hair, green eyes clear and steady. "He was trying to shove me," Harry said. "I moved." "You sent him flying." Harry looked at Dudley, then back at Vernon. "He weighs more than a refrigerator. I barely touched him." Vernon's face purpled. That look, Petunia called it the boil, rose from his neck to his forehead. "Boy," Harry tilted his head. "What?" Vernon crossed the kitchen in 3 stomping steps and grabbed Harry by the front of his shirt. Petunia gasped. Dudley leaned around her with damp, fascinated eyes. Harry looked down at Vernon's fist bunching his collar, then up into his uncle's face. "Let go," he said. Vernon shook him once hard. "You ungrateful little freak." Harry caught his wrist. Just caught it. That should have been nothing. A child's hand around a grown man's arm. Vernon should have ripped free without thinking. Instead he stopped. His face changed first, anger cracking into confusion and then into something uglier. His arm didn't move. Harry's hand tightened, not enough to hurt badly, just enough to make the message clear. Vernon tried to yank away. Nothing. Harry's voice stayed level. "I said let go." Petunia made a thin noise in the back of her throat. Dudley took a step behind her. Vernon swung with his other hand out of pure humiliation. Harry moved too fast for him to follow. 1 second he was in Vernon's grip. The next he was to the side, still holding Vernon's wrist, turning with the motion. Vernon gave a strangled shout as his own momentum carried him forward and down. He hit the kitchen table. The oak frame snapped in the middle like dry wood. Plates exploded across the floor. For a long moment nobody moved. Vernon groaned under the wreckage. Harry let go and stepped back, breathing slow and easy. He didn't look shocked. He looked annoyed, as if this had inconvenienced him. Petunia's face had gone paper white. "What did you do?" Harry stared at her. He hit himself on the table. The table broke. Harry glanced down at the splintered legs and ruined breakfast, then back at her. "That sounds like a table problem." Dudley actually whimpered. Vernon shoved himself upright, red-faced and sweating, but he didn't charge again. He pointed with a shaking finger instead, which Harry noticed and seemed faintly offended by. "Get out," Vernon said. Harry folded his arms. "I live here." "You sleep here," Vernon snarled. "Get out of my sight before you what?" That shut the room down. The boy didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound dramatic. He just asked it like he genuinely wanted to hear the rest. "Before you what?" Vernon knew then, with a hot pulse of shame, that he didn't have an answer. Harry saw it too. That was the worst part. The boy's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, worse than a smile, recognition. He turned, stepped over the broken table, and walked out into the back garden like he owned the place. A few seconds later, there was a sound overhead, a rush of air, and Petunia darted to the window. Harry was sitting on the roof. His knees were drawn up, one arm resting across them, hair moving in the morning breeze. He looked down at Privet Drive with the bored patience of a king trapped in a particularly stupid country. "He didn't use the drain pipe," Dudley whispered. No one answered him. They didn't talk about it. That was the Dursley way. If something impossible happened, you swallowed it until it burned a hole through your insides and called it discipline. But they all noticed the new rules that settled into the house after that. Vernon stopped trying to drag Harry anywhere by force. Petunia stopped shutting him in the cupboard. Dudley stopped coming into his room with his gang when he'd had a bad day, not because they had become kinder. They hadn't, because fear had finally caught up with reality. Harry noticed it, of course. He noticed everything. The way Vernon never turned his back on him for long. The way Petunia watched his hands. The way Dudley flinched when Harry stood too fast. It might have gone to another boy's head. With Harry, it just made him less patient. He went to school because that was where books were. He learned quickly because there was no point pretending not to. He took apart broken radios, old locks, bicycle chains, anything with pieces. He liked understanding how things fit and what made them fail. He did not like bullies. That became a problem for everyone else. When Dudley and Piers cornered a smaller Year 4 boy behind the bicycle sheds, Harry arrived by dropping over the fence in a blur and landing between them. Piers had yelped and stumbled backward. Dudley had tried to puff up, which would have worked better if Harry wasn't looking at him like he was already tired of the conversation. "Move," Dudley said. "Number, we're busy." Harry glanced past him at the boy with split glasses and shaky hands. "Look serious. Mind your own business." Harry leaned a shoulder against the brick wall and crossed his arms. "It is my business now," Piers muttered. "He's doing the thing again." Dudley threw him a furious look. "What thing?" "The staring thing." Harry did not stop staring. Dudley tried to push him. That was his first mistake. His second was trying it in front of other people. Harry caught his wrist, twisted just enough to turn the larger boy off balance, and sent him skidding into the fence hard enough to rattle the chain links. Piers bolted without a word. The smaller boy stared like Harry had dropped out of the clouds. "Go on," Harry said without looking away from Dudley. The kid ran. Dudley clutched the fence, face red with pain and humiliation. "I'll tell my dad," Harry shrugged. "Do it." Dudley hesitated. "He'll kill you." "No, he won't." The certainty in Harry's voice hit harder than the shove had. Harry stepped forward once. Dudley stepped back. "Find someone smaller," Harry said. "Or better yet, don't." Then he walked off. By 11, no one in Little Winging quite knew what to do with Harry Potter. Teachers called him bright but difficult. Neighbors called him odd. Mothers lowered their voices when they said his name. Boys who liked taking cheap shots when adults weren't looking mysteriously found themselves on their backs before they understood they were in a fight. Harry never started things. He just ended them very decisively. And then the letters began. The first one came on a Tuesday, pale yellow and addressed in emerald ink. Mr. H. Potter, smallest bedroom, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging. Surrey. Petunia made a choking sound when she saw it. Vernon snatched it off the mat before Harry could reach down. For one strange second the whole hallway held still, Harry's gaze fixed on the envelope. "Give me that," he said. Vernon crushed it in one fist. "Number." Harry's eyes narrowed. "That has my name on it. It has nothing you need." Vernon turned, stomped into the kitchen, and dropped the envelope straight into the burner flame. Petunia shut the oven door with trembling hands. Harry stood in the doorway and watched the paper curl black. "What was that?" he asked. "No idea," Vernon said too quickly. "Probably nonsense." Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Petunia. She looked away first. That was answer enough. The next morning there were 3 letters. Vernon got to them first again, red-faced and breathing hard, as if he'd been waiting by the door. He tore them up so violently bits of parchment floated into the hall like dead moth wings. Harry caught one fragment out of the air. "School of Witchcraft." Vernon lunged for it. Harry moved without thinking. He slipped aside and Vernon crashed shoulder first into the coat stand, which shattered under his weight. Harry unfolded the torn scrap. Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. Vernon ripped the piece from his hand and slammed him into the wall. The plaster cracked. Harry didn't. He looked down at Vernon's forearm, pinning his chest, and then back up into his uncle's bulging face. "That was stupid," Harry said. Vernon let go at once. He knew. The moment had gotten away from him, the pulse of blind panic, the old habit of violence. He knew it, and Harry knew he knew it. "Boy," Vernon said, backing off, "you will not read those letters." Harry straightened his shirt. "Then I definitely need to." More letters came. Then dozens. They slid through the letterbox in hissing bursts. They stacked on the windowsill. They landed on Vernon's breakfast plate. Petunia screamed when one dropped into her teacup. Vernon nailed the slot shut. Letters came down the chimney. By the end of the week, Harry had caught 3 unopened envelopes out of the air and hidden them under a loose floorboard in his room, more because Vernon wanted them so badly than from any real need. But at night, he pulled them out and traced the green ink with his thumb, staring at the words. School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Magic. The word should have sounded ridiculous. Instead, it felt like something clicking into place. No one had ever explained him, not the things that broke when he was angry, not the way he sometimes woke from dreams of open sky with his whole body humming, not how easy it was to move, to hit, to catch, to leap, not why fear never stayed in him the way it seemed to stay in other people. Magic, maybe, or part of it. Vernon panicked on the Sunday the flood truly began. There were letters in the hedges, letters on the car roof, letters somehow inside the locked microwave. Vernon packed the family into the car with the wild, desperate energy of a man fleeing artillery. Harry climbed in because he wanted to see what happened next. The drive out of Surrey went from tense to absurd quickly. Vernon swore at traffic, then at weather, then at gulls, then at reality itself. Petunia sat rigid in the passenger seat, clutching Dudley like he might dissolve. Harry looked out the window and watched gray towns slip by. "Where are we going?" he asked after 3 hours. "Somewhere they won't find us." "Who's they?" "No one," Vernon snapped. Harry smiled faintly. "Right. They ended in a miserable shack on a rock in the middle of rough black water, the kind of place that looked embarrassed to exist." Vernon seemed pleased with it. Petunia looked betrayed. Dudley looked hungry. Harry stepped inside, ducked a low beam, and took one sweep of the room. Thin walls, one proper door, weak hinges, cracked window, bad stove, no real problem. He set his little bag down and said, "This won't help." Vernon swung around. "What?" "If someone can put letters in a locked microwave, this won't stop them." Petunia hissed. "Stop saying things like that." Harry leaned against the wall. "You know I'm right." No one slept much. The wind battered the hut. Rain thudded on the roof. Dudley snored in brief, frightened bursts. Near midnight, Harry sat on the windowsill and watched the sea hurl itself against the rock below. Then the clock struck 12. There was one heavy knock at the door. The whole shack seemed to jump. Dudley squealed. Petunia clamped both hands over her mouth. Vernon grabbed the rifle he had brought because of course he had. The knock came again, not hurried, not angry, confident. Harry stood. "Stay there," Vernon barked. Harry ignored him. The third knock nearly took the door off before Vernon got there. He yanked it open with the rifle shaking in his hands, and for the first time in Harry's memory, Vernon Dursley looked small. The man filling the doorway was enormous. He had a wild black beard, eyes that flashed under shaggy hair, and a coat slick with rain. The storm curled around him like something that had followed him in on purpose. Harry's first thought was that the hut suddenly looked even smaller. The giant looked over Vernon's shoulder, found Harry in a single sweep, and stopped. The whole room waited on that silence. Then the stranger's face split with astonished delight. "Well," he said, voice rolling like thunder and warm bread somehow at the same time, "you're not what I expected." Vernon found his voice first. "I demand that you leave this instant." The giant didn't spare him a glance. "I said move." Vernon raised the rifle. Harry was already moving. He crossed the room before Petunia could gasp and caught the barrel just as Vernon jerked it up. Metal bent in his hands with a screaming crunch. He twisted once and took the gun apart like it was made of cheap tin. The room went dead quiet. The giant looked from the wrecked rifle to Harry. Then he barked out a laugh so huge it shook dust from the rafters. "Oh, that's brilliant." Vernon stumbled backward into a chair and nearly sat on Dudley. Harry dropped the twisted gun pieces on the floor. "You knocked," he said to the giant. "You can come in." The man ducked through the doorway, bringing half the weather with him. "Name S. Hagrid, keeper o' keys and grounds at Hogwarts. Though mostly I'm here tell yes something yes should have been told years ago." Harry folded his arms. "I'm listening." Hagrid reached inside his coat and pulled out a dry envelope as if it had been waiting there all along. Emerald ink, heavy parchment. He held it out. Harry took it, feeling Vernon's stare like heat on the side of his face. He opened it neatly this time and read every line. His eyes moved once over the words, then again slower. "School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, first year. Term begins on the 1st of September. Harry looked up. "This is real." Hagrid's eyes crinkled. "Very real." Petunia found her voice in a hard, high snap. "He will not go." Harry turned to her so quickly she flinched. "You knew." It wasn't a question. Petunia's mouth tightened. "You knew," Harry repeated, softer now, which was somehow worse. "All this time." "She was my sister," Petunia said, and something old and bitter cracked through her careful voice. "I knew enough." Harry stepped toward her. Vernon tried to stand and then thought better of it. "My mother went there," Harry said. Petunia's nostrils flared. "Yes. My father too." "Yes." "And you were going to say nothing." Petunia's face twisted. "What good would it have done?" Harry laughed once, sharp and humorless. "For who?" Hagrid cleared his throat like someone trying not to set off a larger blast. "Perhaps we ought to focus on the letter first." Harry looked back at him. There was no fear in that look, Hagrid noticed. Surprise, yes. Anger, definitely. Curiosity like a live wire, but no fear. Most 11-year-olds would have been overwhelmed. Most even older would have been. Harry just looked ready. "Why didn't anyone come before?" Harry asked. Hagrid hesitated. Vernon made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Go on, tell him." Hagrid's big hands shifted awkwardly. "Complicated circumstances." Harry's eyes narrowed. "That's not an answer." "No," Hagrid admitted, "but it's the one I've got permission to give tonight." Harry weighed that in silence and didn't like it. Hagrid could see that too. Then Dudley made the mistake of leaning around Petunia and saying, "He's a freak anyway." Harry did not even turn. "Say it again," he said. Dudley shrank back instantly. Hagrid's expression changed. The warmth stayed, but something harder slid underneath it. "Best not." Vernon licked his lips. "He's not going anywhere with you." Harry looked at him like he'd started talking in a foreign language. "Yes, I am." "You ungrateful." Harry stepped in front of Hagrid. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't need to. The room simply understood. Vernon stopped. Harry's voice came low and clear. "You burned my letters, lied to me for years, dragged me onto a rock in a storm because you thought that would stop whatever this is. So let's save time. I'm leaving." Petunia's face went tight and ugly. "You think they'll want you, after all your abnormality?" Harry glanced down at the twisted gun on the floor. "I'm starting to think abnormality isn't the insult you think it is." Hagrid's laugh rumbled out again, but he bit it back when Harry looked over. "Tomorrow," Harry said. "We go tomorrow." "We go today," Hagrid said. "Well, after a bite." He produced a battered cake from somewhere inside his coat, which felt impossible even by current standards. The icing had slid sideways. Harry stared at it. Hagrid rubbed the back of his neck. "Might have got sat on a bit." Harry took the cake and to Petunia's clear horror smiled for real. That changed the room more than the bent rifle had. It wasn't a huge smile, it didn't make him softer, but it was sudden and bright and startlingly young. "Thanks," he said. Hagrid blinked as if something in him had gone tender all at once. "You're welcome, Harry." The next morning Harry left Privet Drive with one trunk, a cage that contained a barn owl Hagrid insisted he ought to have, and no intention of ever being dragged back. He did not say goodbye. Vernon didn't come to the door. Petunia watched through the curtain. Dudley stayed hidden. The train into London felt too slow for Harry's mood, but Hagrid made good company. He talked a lot, but not in a way Harry minded. He talked like a man who loved his world enough that it leaked out of him at every chance. Harry learned the names of streets no muggle could see, heard gossip about old families and school houses, learned that his parents had been popular, bright, and dead in a way everyone still spoke around rather than through. Whenever he pushed too hard on details, Hagrid's answers blurred. "You'll hear the full story from Dumbledore, likely." "Why not from you?" Hagrid scratched his beard. "Because some truths belong in the right hands." Harry looked out the train window. "That usually means someone thinks I can't handle them." Hagrid opened his mouth, closed it again, and then said honestly, "Could be." Harry turned back to him, expression sharp. Hagrid lifted both hands. "Ain't sayin' I agree with all of it." That was at least interesting. London was loud, gray, and wet around them, and then suddenly it was. The leaky cauldron looked ordinary from the outside until Harry stepped through its door and the whole room changed in a rush. Conversations cut off. Tankards paused halfway to mouths. A witch in violet robes put a hand over her chest. An old wizard by the bar made a squeaking sound. Hagrid had mentioned he was known. Harry had not understood what that meant. He understood now. A bald man darted forward first and shook Harry's hand so hard the bench creaked. Then a witch with tears in her eyes. Then another wizard and another. People kept repeating his name like testing whether it was true. Harry kept his face level through most of it. Being stared at never bothered him. Being treated like a miracle did. A dark-haired man with a turban hanging awkwardly over his ears came up last, smiling a little too hard. Professor Quirrell, Hagrid said, teaches defense against the dark arts. Quirrell reached for Harry's hand. The moment their skin met, Quirrell jerked like he'd touched a live wire. Harry's grip closed instinctively. Quirrell gave a strangled noise. Harry let go at once, but his eyes had already sharpened. "You all right?" Quirrell was sweating. "Fine, perfectly fine." His gaze stayed fixed on Harry a beat too long, not celebrity awe, not exactly fear either, recognition maybe. Then he backed away so quickly he nearly hit a chair. Hagrid frowned after him. Odd little man. Harry watched Quirrell disappear into the crowd. He felt wrong. Hagrid glanced down. Wrong how? Harry thought of cold silk pulled over something rotten. Like he was hiding inside his own skin. Hagrid stared for a second, then clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to move most grown men half a step. Harry didn't budge. "Right," Hagrid said. "Bank first." Gringotts was white stone and sharp lines and the sort of cold that wasn't about temperature. Goblins watched everything. Harry respected that instantly. They also watched him, not with reverence like the leaky cauldron, with calculation. One of them took Hagrid's paperwork with long-fingered precision and glanced up at Harry only once. That one glance lingered. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said. Harry met his eyes. "That's me." Something unreadable flickered over the creature's face. Indeed, the ride to the vaults would have made Dudley sick. Harry thought it was excellent. The Potter vault held more gold than Vernon had likely made in his entire life. Harry looked at the stacks and piles and didn't leap around or gape. He just turned slowly, taking it in. "This is all mine," Hagrid puffed up a little. "Your parents." Harry crouched by a heap of coins and let a few spill through his fingers. Money meant choices. Choices meant freedom. Simple. He filled a bag without bothering to count much. As Hagrid took him toward another vault, one very small, very empty-looking one that held a grubby-wrapped package Harry was clearly not meant to ask about. Harry noticed a portrait-sized brass plaque in one corridor wall. The engraving had been polished often. Potter Family Holdings sub Trusts sealed by Ward of L. Potter below that in smaller letters. Patronymic claim disputed. Archival lock maintained. Harry slowed. "Wait." Hagrid's shoulders rose nearly to his ears. Harry pointed at the plaque. "What does that mean?" Hagrid looked as if he wanted to physically hide the wall behind his back. "Old goblin phrasing," he said too quickly. "They write everything weird." Harry didn't move. Hagrid tried again. "Legal goblin business, boring stuff." Harry read the line once more, patro something, claim disputed. He might not know the exact word, but he knew a dodge when he heard one. "Hagrid," the giant winced. "What," Harry asked quietly, "is a patronymic claim?" Hagrid scratched his beard for a very long time. "Means whose name gets passed on, in certain magical contracts." Harry's gaze did not leave his face. "And disputed," Hagrid exhaled through his nose. "Means someone argued about it once." "Who?" "That," Hagrid said with miserable firmness, "is one o' the truths I'm definitely not allowed to explain." Harry looked back at the plaque. Then he smiled without warmth. Good, now I know which question to keep asking. Hagrid muttered something that sounded suspiciously like Dumbledore's problem now. Diagon Alley should have felt ridiculous after that. Instead, it sharpened Harry further. Shops spilled robes, books, cauldrons, owls, silver instruments, bottled storms of color. Wizards drifted around him, stealing glances and pretending not to. Harry let them. At Madame Malkin's, a pale boy with slicked hair stood on the next stool being fitted for robes and talked without waiting for answers. Hogwarts, the boy said. Yes. My father says first years should know which sort of people are worth knowing before they arrive. Saves time. Harry looked him over. Expensive clothes, soft hands, mouth that had never been properly challenged. Does it? The boy missed the warning completely. Of course, some families are better than others. Harry's expression stayed neutral. You don't say, the boy smirked. You'll see. Harry stepped down from the stool when his fitting was done. I already have. The boy frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Harry picked up his packages. Exactly what it sounded like. And he walked out. Hagrid, waiting with a stack of books under one arm, raised his brows. Make a friend. Not likely. Good instinct. The wand shop was narrow and dusty and full of the kind of silence that listened back. Mr. Ollivander appeared so suddenly Harry almost smiled. The old man's pale eyes fixed on him with unsettling intensity. Ah, that was all he said at first. Just ah, as though a conversation had resumed that Harry had never known he was part of. Holly, Ollivander murmured, coming around the shelves. 11 inches, phoenix feather. I remember every wand I ever sold, Mr. Potter, especially that one. Harry didn't answer. He knew who he meant. Ollivander's eyes flicked to the scar on his forehead and then lower, as if he were listening to Harry's pulse through the room. And yet, that is not the only inheritance walking in here today, is it? Hagrid made a choking noise. Harry's chin tipped up. I keep hearing versions of that sentence. Ollivander smiled thinly. Do you? How inconvenient for the people trying not to tell you things. Hagrid hissed. Ollivander, oh hush, if they wanted ignorance they shouldn't have brought him to a place made for resonance. Harry stepped closer to the counter. What do you know? Ollivander selected a wand and handed it over. Try this. Harry took it. Nothing. Another wand, sparks. Wrong. Another. A loud bang that knocked a tray of quills off a shelf. Ollivander moved faster, muttering wood types under his breath. Vine, hornbeam, ebony, none of them settled. A few snapped in Harry's grip, not because he meant to break them, but because something in him rejected the fit violently. Then Ollivander went still. Perhaps, he said softly, we should stop asking the wand to contain all of you. He disappeared into the back room and returned with a slim box that looked older than the rest. Holly, he said, phoenix feather, brother to the wand that gave you that scar, and unusually adaptable under stress. Harry took it. Heat flooded his hand, not burning, not painful. Recognition. The wand whipped once through the air almost on its own, and the shop answered. Dust flew upward in a golden spiral. Glass trembled in the cases. A note rang through the room like a struck bell. Hagrid swore under his breath. Ollivander did not look surprised. Yes, he said, I thought so. Harry lowered the wand slowly. Thought what? Ollivander's gaze sharpened to needlepoint. That magic knows when it has met something older than itself in spirit, if not in age. That doesn't mean anything. It means, Ollivander said, leaning on the counter, that when you choose what kind of man to become, the world will feel it. Harry slipped the wand back into the box. People keep talking like I'm some kind of storm. Ollivander's smile came back, faint and unsettling. No, Mr. Potter, storms are mindless. Outside, Hagrid let out a long breath. You all right? He asked. Harry tucked the wand under his arm with the rest of his parcels. Number. Hagrid blinked. No. Harry started walking again. But I'm interested. That made Hagrid laugh so hard he had to stop and lean against a post. King's Cross on the 1st of September smelled like hot iron and old rain. Petunia had driven Harry there in brittle silence and left the moment his trunk hit the pavement. No hug. No final speech. No warning beyond the one she threw through the window before driving off. Don't come crawling back. Harry watched the car vanish into traffic and felt nothing at all. Platform 9 3/4 took him less than 5 minutes to solve because, unlike Vernon, he wasn't committed to believing impossible things were impossible. He watched a family of redheads vanish through the barrier one by one and followed. The scarlet train stood under steam and shouting. Harry liked it immediately. He found an empty compartment for all of 10 minutes before the door slid open, and a freckled boy with ears too large for his head looked in. "Everywhere else is full," he said. "Can I?" "Yes." The boy blinked, then grinned and hauled his trunk in. "Brilliant, I'm Ron, by the way, Ron Weasley." "Harry." Ron froze with one knee on the seat. "Shut up." Harry raised an eyebrow, not planning to. Ron stared another second, then burst into helpless laughter. Sorry, it's just blimey, you are Harry Potter, so I keep hearing." Ron's grin widened. "Good, was worried you might be awful." Harry leaned back against the seat. "Still possible." Ron considered that. "Fair." It was easy after that. Easier than Harry expected. Ron didn't treat him like a relic or a test. He talked too fast, ate too much, and said what he thought before checking if it was wise. Harry appreciated all three. By the time the trolley had come and gone and Harry had bought enough sweets to make Ron look at him like he'd performed a financial miracle, a girl with bushy brown hair appeared in the doorway. "Has anyone seen a toad?" she asked briskly. "A boy named Neville's lost one." "No," Ron said. She looked at Harry, then at the chocolate wrappers, then back at Harry. "Honestly, first years." Harry looked at the empty seat opposite him. "You can search in here if you want." She hesitated at the offer, then stepped inside. "Thank you." Her eyes were sharp, quick. She took in their books, luggage, robes, and probably half their personalities in one sweep. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said. "Harry." "I know," he smirked. "Another one," Ron groaned. "You get used to it." "Not yet." Hermione had already spotted the wand box by Harry's knee. "Have you done any magic yet? Not on purpose." "I've practiced a few simple spells," she said, unable to keep the satisfaction out of her voice. "They all worked. My parents were shocked." Ron made a face. "Show off." Hermione ignored him and peered more closely at Harry. "Is it true you really survived you-know-who?" Harry held her gaze. "Seems so." She must have heard something in his tone because her own changed a little. Softer, less like a questionnaire. "Sorry." Harry shrugged one shoulder. "Wasn't your fault." She nodded once, apparently deciding he could be spoken to like a human after all. "Well, if I see Neville's toad, I'll tell him you haven't stolen it." Ron spluttered. "Why would we steal a toad?" Hermione's mouth twitched. "You looked capable of poor decisions." When she left, Ron stared after her. "She's terrifying." Harry popped a chocolate frog into his mouth. "She'll be useful." The pale boy from Madame Malkin's appeared later with two thicker boys behind him. He looked pleased with himself right up until he recognized Harry. "Oh," he said, "it's you." Harry didn't move from his seat. "Still me." The boy glanced at Ron and his lip curled. "I heard about you before I saw you." "Harry Potter, isn't it? I'm Draco Malfoy." "Congratulations." Ron choked on a laugh and covered it with a cough. Draco's face tightened. "You might find life easier if you learned who matters." Harry set his sweets aside and stood. He wasn't much taller than Draco yet, didn't need to be. One of the bigger boys, Crabbe or Goyle, Harry didn't care which, shifted forward like he'd been trained to loom on command. Harry looked at him first. "Don't," he said. The boy stopped. That seemed to annoy Draco more than anything Harry had actually said. He stuck out his hand with stiff, aristocratic confidence. "You'll want the right sort of friends." Harry looked at the hand, then at Draco's face. "No," he said, "I won't." He didn't leave it at that. He stepped closer, close enough that Draco had to tilt his head back slightly to hold the stare. "And if your idea of the right sort needs bodyguards to stand upright," Harry added, "try someone easier." Draco's hand dropped. For a second his expression flashed hot and embarrassed and very young. Then the sneer came back, brittle and borrowed from older men. "You'll regret that," Harry smiled. "Tell yourself that if it helps." Draco spun and stalked off with his bruisers behind him. Ron exhaled. "That was Malfoy, meaning his family's awful." Harry sat back down. "Then my instincts are excellent." The Sorting Hat took one look inside Harry's head and went very quiet. "Well," it said at last, "you are not standard." Harry sat on the stool under 1,000 watching eyes and thought, "Neither are you." A dry little chuckle brushed the edge of his mind. True enough. There's ambition in you, defiance, a taste for impact. You don't flinch from force. You rather enjoy it only when it's deserved, do you? Harry's jaw tightened. Put me where I'll get the least idiots. The hat considered that. Slytherin would sharpen you. You could rule there. I'm 11. That has stopped far lesser people than you. The words brought a strange heat with them, as if the hat had brushed against something hard and ancient under Harry's skin. Not magic exactly. Something that met pressure with pressure and called it breathing. Interesting, the hat whispered. Harry was done with being examined. Gryffindor, bold then, loudly so. The hat shouted it to the hall. Applause broke out around the Gryffindor table. Ron cheered outright. Hermione looked satisfied. Harry handed the hat back and ignored the way Dumbledore was studying him from the staff table with bright, unreadable eyes. He noticed something else too. Professor Quirrell, pale under his turban, had gone rigid. The first weeks at Hogwarts did not calm Harry down. They made more sense of him. Magic came easily where it was honest. Charms, transfiguration, practical work with clear rules, he liked those. Potions annoyed him because Snape taught like a man, setting traps for children and calling it education. History of magic nearly killed him from boredom. Flying was different. Madame Hooch barked instructions. Brooms rose shakily into hands all around the field. Harry's jumped before she finished the sentence, slapping straight into his palm with a crack. Draco noticed. Of course he did. Then Neville's broom shot upward wild, carrying him with it. Harry was already moving when Neville slipped. The boy's hands lost their grip. He dropped. Harry kicked off the grass so hard dirt blasted backward. Gasps erupted around the field. He didn't grab a broom. He didn't need one. He went up. For one clean, impossible second, there was nothing under him but air and speed and the sharp joy of being exactly where his body had always wanted to be. He caught Neville one-handed 10 feet before impact, turned in midair, and landed lightly enough that the grass barely bent. Neville clung to him, white-faced and shaking. Harry set him down. Breathe. The field had gone silent. Madame Hooch stared. Then Draco, because he was incapable of surviving embarrassment quietly, snatched Neville's dropped Remembrall from the ground and backed away with his eyes glittering. Maybe if Longbottom forgets where to land, he called, voice too loud, this'll help. Harry turned. Draco threw the glass ball straight up. Harry looked at the sky, then at Draco, and laughed. Oh, brilliant, he said. He jumped. This time he didn't just rise. He shot upward like he'd been yanked by a giant invisible hand. Wind tore through his hair. The Remembrall spun above him, red smoke flashing inside. Harry caught it at the apex, hung there for half a breath over the entire field, and then came down in a controlled spiral that left half the first years gaping and the other half ducking. He landed in front of Draco and put the Remembrall into Neville's hand. Draco looked furious, also scared. Harry filed both away. Professor McGonagall had reached the field by then, black robes snapping around her. Mr. Potter, she said. Harry turned to face her. No denial, no apology. Students leaned in from every side. McGonagall's eyes were sharp enough to cut granite. They flicked once to the broom still lying untouched in the grass. Then they came back to him. Come with me, she said. Ron looked like he was preparing for execution on Harry's behalf. Harry only asked, why? A few students actually gasped at that. McGonagall's nostrils flared. Because, she said, I have just seen an 11-year-old perform unaided aerial maneuvering that should not be remotely possible, and I would prefer to discuss whether you are planning to break all school precedent before or after lunch. Harry considered that. Fair enough. By dinner he was Gryffindor's new seeker. By the end of the week the whole school knew he could fly without a broom. That changed things, not all at once, not in some dramatic burst, in smaller ways. Students moved for him in corridors, some out of admiration, some out of caution. Older Slytherins stopped trying casual intimidation. Fred and George Weasley decided he was the most entertaining thing to happen to the castle in years. Hermione started correcting him less and watching him more, as if trying to solve an equation that kept punching through the paper. Teachers split too. McGonagall became watchful but practical. Flitwick looked delighted every time Harry did something impossible in class. Snape's dark stare sharpened into something close to hostility. Dumbledore smiled the same way no matter what happened, which Harry distrusted immediately. Halloween brought the troll. Harry and Ron heard the warning at the same time the Great Hall erupted. Students surged toward the exits, prefects shouted. Somewhere over the noise Hermione's name landed between them. Ron swore. She doesn't know. Harry was already turning. They ran. The troll had smashed its way into the girls' bathroom with all the subtlety of an avalanche. Water spread over cracked tiles. One sink hung off the wall. Hermione was trapped near the far stalls, wand in a white-knuckled grip, her breath coming fast but her eyes still furious rather than panicked. The troll raised its club. Harry hit it in the side hard enough to change the room. The giant creature lurched with a bellow as Harry drove a fist into its ribs and sent it sideways through 2 stall doors. Broken wood exploded. Ron froze for exactly 1 stunned second. Hermione shouted, "Do something, Ronald." That seemed to wake him up. He fired a wild spell that blasted a shower of tiles from the ceiling. Not helpful, but spirited. The troll roared and swung for Harry's head. Harry ducked under the club, drove an uppercut into its jaw, and felt bone go in a way bone should not. The troll's feet left the floor. It hit the wall lost. Hermione stared. That's not normal even now. Later, Harry said. The troll staggered up again, eyes stupid with pain. It grabbed a broken sink and hurled it. Hermione shoved Ron down. Porcelain shattered over them. Harry crossed the distance in a blur, seized the troll by one wrist, and yanked. The creature stumbled forward helplessly. Harry pivoted and slammed it face first into the stone floor. The castle shook. The troll stopped moving. For a heartbeat there was only dripping water and the sound of the 3 of them breathing. Then Ron sat up very slowly and said, "I think I'm in love with him." Hermione gave a hysterical laugh. Harry looked down at the unconscious troll, then at his scraped knuckles. That was messy. Professor McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell burst in moments later to find the bathroom destroyed. A mountain troll spread flat on the floor and 3 first-years standing in the middle of it. Snape took one look at Harry and actually looked pained. McGonagall opened her mouth. Hermione cut in before she could start. "It's my fault." Harry turned to her sharply. She shot him a look that said, "Trust me for once in your life," then faced the teachers with her chin up. "I went looking for the troll because I thought I could handle it," she said. "That was obviously stupid. Harry and Ron came to get me out." Ron looked as startled as if she'd hexed him. McGonagall's expression softened by a fraction. "Miss Granger, it's true," Harry said. Hermione glanced at him and something settled there, not debt, not awe, a decision. They left the bathroom as friends. The Quidditch match against Slytherin turned Harry into a problem no one at Hogwarts could ignore. He could have played normally. He understood that. Keep both hands on the broom, follow expected lines, let the miracle be only that he was fast. But that had never been Harry's style. The moment the game got rough, and a Slytherin beater tried to drive a bludger into Alicia Spinett's face, Harry abandoned normal completely. He kicked off the broom, caught the bludger mid-flight barehanded, and threw it back like a cannonball. The crowd erupted. Wood splintered under his shoes when he landed again. Madame Hooch nearly dropped her whistle. Flint swore loud enough for the teachers' stand to hear. Then Harry saw the snitch. It flashed gold near the Slytherin hoops. He leaned forward. Something hit his broom like a curse biting through the handle. The world jolted. The broom tried to buck him off. Roars went up from the stands. Harry's feet came free. His body swung under the shaft for one wild second with nothing below him but open air and a very long fall. He laughed, actually laughed. Then he let the broom go entirely. 100 people screamed as Harry dropped. He twisted in the air, arrested his own fall 20 feet above the pitch, and shot straight upward on his own power. Wind ripped past him. The rogue broom spun away like discarded rubbish. In the stands, Hermione grabbed Ron's sleeve hard enough to bruise. "That's him, isn't it? That's what he did in first flying lesson." Ron couldn't answer. He was on his feet shouting with everyone else. Harry tore across the pitch at impossible speed, robes snapping behind him. The Slytherin seeker turned too late. Harry reached past him, snatched the snitch from the air, and landed on the commentator's platform hard enough to crack the edge. Lee Jordan stopped mid-sentence. Harry held up the snitch. The stadium exploded. Later, in the common room, while everyone else shouted over the match and reenacted his dive with varying degrees of nonsense, Hermione leaned in near the fire and said, "Your broom didn't do that by itself. Number, did you see who?" Not then. But he had looked after, from the air. Across the stands, Snape had been glaring at the field, lips moving fast. Quirrell had been watching Harry with naked horror. Interesting. Christmas at Hogwarts was the first time Harry understood what peace felt like when it wasn't temporary. No Vernon, no Petunia, no waiting for a cupboard door or a cheap insult. Snow outside the windows. Firelight. Ron in one armchair with his mouth half open. Hermione pretending not to be pleased that Harry had taken to arithmancy puzzles she'd found in the library. Fred and George trying to tempt him into pranks dangerous enough to make McGonagall age a decade. It almost made him forget that someone kept trying to reach the thing hidden on the third-floor corridor. Almost. The mirror found him at night. He had followed a flicker of light through an old classroom and stopped dead in the doorway. At first he saw exactly what any lonely boy would have seen. Lily, James. His mother's hair brighter than flame, her eyes painfully familiar. James laughing with one hand on Harry's shoulder like he belonged there. Harry stepped closer. Then he saw the man standing slightly behind them, broad shoulders, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, a thick mustache, hands clasped behind his back with military stillness. His face wasn't turned fully toward the glass, but Harry could feel his attention like weight. Lily stood between the two men. James looked easy, proud, alive. The other figure looked like a storm wearing a human shape. Harry's breath slowed. He reached toward the mirror. The room behind him stirred. Dumbledore stood in the doorway in midnight blue robes, silver beard half-lit by moonlight. "Interesting," Harry said without turning around. "I was going to ask you who he is." Dumbledore was quiet for so long that Harry finally faced him. The old man's expression was not easy to read. Sad, maybe, tired, not surprised. "The mirror of Erised," Dumbledore said, "shows us our deepest and most desperate desires." Harry looked back at the reflection. So what we want is not always what we are ready to hear. That's not an answer either. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened behind the half-moon spectacles. "You have noticed that about me. Have you noticed that I dislike it?" The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. Frequently, Harry stepped away from the mirror. "Who is he?" Dumbledore clasped his hands. "A question with consequences." Harry's patience snapped thin. "My entire life apparently has consequences. Try honesty." Something in the air changed then, not with magic exactly, with the sudden clear pressure of two stubborn wills meeting directly. Dumbledore did not look away. "Your mother loved you," he said. "James Potter loved you. That at least has never been in doubt." Harry's face gave away nothing. "That was careful." "Yes, which means there is more." "Yes." Harry let that sit between them like a blade. "And you're still not telling me." "Not tonight," Harry smiled coldly. "Then don't ask for trust tonight either." Dumbledore took that and did not flinch. "Fair." He moved aside from the doorway. "Leave the mirror, Harry. It can become a cage for questions the living still have to answer." Harry looked at him one last moment, then at the stranger in the glass. When he left, he knew two things for certain. Dumbledore was hiding something serious, and whatever it was, it had to do with blood. Spring sharpened everything. Hagrid let slip one too many odd remarks about a package taken from Gringotts and a dog named Fluffy. Draco nearly got himself killed by vanity during the dragon business and blamed Harry for not caring enough. Snape prowled the corridors like a man who knew a thief was circling, but not which way to swing. Harry, Ron, and Hermione started putting the pieces together in the library over stacks of restricted references and stolen sandwiches. "Philosopher's Stone," Hermione whispered, finger tracing a line in an ancient text. "It makes the elixir of life. It turns metal into gold." Ron whistled. "So that's what's under the trapdoor." Harry leaned back in his chair. "And someone wants it badly enough to curse brooms and sneak around a three-headed dog." Hermione looked up sharply. "You still think it was Snape?" Harry thought of Quirrell's hand jerking in the leaky cauldron, thought of the fear in the man's eyes during the match, thought of Snape's stare on the pitch, furious and intent. "No," he said. "I think Snape was trying to stop it." Ron blinked. "Then who?" Harry's mouth flattened. "The stammering coward with the turban." That theory sounded ridiculous right up until the night they found the forest empty of centaurs, the castle tense as wire, and Hagrid accidentally confessed that whatever was guarding the stone was arranged by teachers who trusted each other. Which means, Hermione said, face pale and set, if Quirrell is involved, he has access. Then we move tonight, Harry said. Ron swallowed. Past the dog, past all the traps. Harry stood. Yes, just us. Harry looked at him. You don't have to come. Ron's ears went red instantly. I wasn't saying that. Hermione shut her book with a hard snap. Neither was I. The corridor beyond Fluffy's door smelled faintly of old magic and wet fur. The huge dog slept to Hagrid's flute. Harry was through the trapdoor first. Devil's Snare tried to strangle them in the dark and lost when Harry simply ripped the vines apart faster than they could tighten. Keys swarmed in the next chamber. Hermione spotted the right one while Harry smashed a path through the rest. The chessboard nearly stopped them until Ron, face white but eyes steady, moved into command like he'd been born for battle and sacrificed himself in a crack of stone and flying pieces to clear Harry a path. Don't you dare waste this, Ron muttered as he went down. Harry's jaw tightened. Wouldn't dream of it. He and Hermione crossed into the potion chamber breathing hard. She solved Snape's logic puzzle in under a minute, muttering to herself, then shoved the smallest bottle into Harry's hand. You go, she said. Harry looked back at the black flames, then at her. If I'm not back soon, I know, get help. Try not to murder anyone too fast, I assume. He almost smiled. Good plan. The final chamber was colder than the rest. Quirrell stood before the mirror of Erised, hands clasped behind his back so tightly the knuckles showed white. His turban shadow stretched long across the floor. He did not turn immediately. I wondered how long it would take you, he said. Harry stepped fully into the room. You shouldn't have touched my broom. Quirrell laughed once, ragged and ugly. That is what you lead with. Harry rolled a shoulder. I've had a strange year. Now Quirrell turned. The stammer was gone, so was the timid posture. Fear remained, but no longer the fear of classrooms and students. This was the fear of a man standing too near the thing he'd chosen to worship. I tried to understand you, Quirrell said. All year. A child among children, and yet you move like violence given manners. You look at danger as if it has disappointed you. Harry's grip tightened around the potion bottle. You talk too much, Quirrell smiled thinly, and you leap too fast. That can be useful. Harry advanced one step. Where is the stone? In the mirror, I expect, hidden from me. Quirrell's eyes flicked to the glass, then back. But perhaps not from you. Harry stopped. Something cold moved through the room then, a whisper against the skin, and Quirrell shuddered with something like delight. A second voice slid into the air. Harry Potter, not loud, worse than loud, intimate, certain. Harry's gaze snapped to Quirrell's head. Quirrell's smile broke wider. Yes, he whispered. He is here. He has been with me all year. His hands rose. Very calmly, with the sick inevitability of a curtain pulled back on rot, he unwound the turban. The face on the back of his head was wax-pale and slit-eyed, its features raw and unnatural as if not fully anchored to flesh. The red eyes fixed on Harry and did not blink. Harry had seen nightmares. This was not that. Nightmares were usually trying too hard. Voldemort simply looked certain he deserved to exist. So, the dark wizard said softly, the child who lived, and more than that. Harry felt revulsion first, then anger, then something harder when Voldemort's smile sharpened. Yes, Voldemort murmured. You feel it, don't you? The difference in your blood, the noise it makes. I felt it the night I marked you, though I did not understand. Lily Potter's protection saved you, but something else answered too. Something old, brutal, sky-bred. Quirrell's eyes shone fever-bright. He has wondered, my lord, they've all hidden it. Harry's scar burned. He ignored it. What do you want? He asked. Voldemort's ruined face remained very still. At first, to kill you. That remains appealing, but now I would rather know how your mother came by such a lineage, how a wizarding child wears another species' arrogance like skin. Harry took one more step forward. Try asking me from a hospital bed. Quirrell's wand flashed up. Do not be foolish, boy. You are strong, yes. Strange, yes. But strength without knowledge is. Harry moved. The potion bottle shattered on the stone as he crossed the space between them in a blur and drove his fist into Quirrell's chest. The crack echoed like gunfire. Quirrell flew backward into the mirror hard enough to spiderweb the frame. He screamed not only from impact. Smoke rose where Harry's hand had touched him. Lily's protection. Voldemort shrieked through Quirrell's mouth, high and furious. Again, touch him again. Harry didn't need the invitation. Quirrell scrambled up with genuine panic at last in his eyes, wand jerking. Avada! Harry seized his wrist before the curse finished and crushed bone. The wand clattered away. Quirrell howled. Harry grabbed him by the throat with his free hand. Skin burned under Harry's fingers. Quirrell convulsed. The smell was horrible. Harry held on. Voldemort screamed louder, a sound of rage and disbelief. Quirrell clawed at Harry's arm uselessly. His flesh blackened where they touched. The back face writhed, red eyes blazing with hatred. "You should have stayed hidden," Harry said. Then he slammed Quirrell into the floor. Stone cracked. When he lifted him again, the man was barely a man at all. The body was already collapsing inward, unraveling under the force of Lily's protection and Harry's refusal to let go. Voldemort's face twisted in loathing. "This is not over." Harry leaned down close enough to feel the icy wrongness pouring off him. "I know." He closed his hand. Quirrell came apart into ash and torn cloth. A violent force burst out of what remained, cold, bodiless, furious. It hit Harry like a blizzard through bone. For one instant he saw flashes that weren't his. A ruined hall, green fire, 1,000 acts of cruelty committed with total confidence. Then the thing recoiled. Not from the scar this time, from Harry himself. It fled screaming through the room and vanished into the dark. Harry stood in the silence after, breathing hard, ash on his hands. The stone slid into his pocket as he turned toward the mirror, unnoticed until then. Dumbledore's design, probably. Clever. He had just begun to process that when dizziness swept in. The room tilted. He caught himself on the mirror frame and looked down at the blood rising through the cracks in his knuckles. Then the door burst open. Dumbledore swept in, robes flying, power crowding the chamber so suddenly the broken glass hummed. His eyes went from the ash on the floor to Harry's hands to the doorway behind him where distant footsteps suggested help was still coming. For one tiny beat, Dumbledore looked shocked, not at the outcome, at the speed of it. Harry straightened despite the spinning in his head. "You're late." Dumbledore's gaze sharpened. "So I am." He stepped closer, saw the stone in Harry's hand, and something relieved flickered across his face. "May I?" Harry considered refusing. Then he dropped the stone into Dumbledore's palm. The old wizard closed his fingers around it. "Ron, alive. Hermione, alive. Quirrell." Harry glanced at the ash. "Not." Dumbledore followed the look and nodded once, almost sadly. "I see." Harry swayed. Dumbledore's hand was suddenly at his elbow. Harry pulled free on instinct. Dumbledore let him. "You may distrust me as much as you like, Harry. For the next few hours, allow me to keep you conscious anyway." That almost got a laugh out of him. Almost. The hospital wing smelled clean enough to insult injury. Madame Pomfrey fussed. Ron came around with a concussion and a look of deep offense when told he'd missed the final fight. Hermione demanded every detail the instant she was permitted near the bed. Harry gave them only the parts that mattered. Quirrell had been the one after the stone. Voldemort had been there somehow. It was not over. By evening, Dumbledore arrived alone and closed the curtain behind him. Harry sat up before the old man could speak. "Who is the man in the mirror?" Dumbledore's brows rose slightly, straight to the point. "Yes." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment and then, to Harry's surprise, took the chair rather than looming over the bed. "James Potter was your father in every way that mattered to the man himself," Dumbledore said. Harry felt his heartbeat slow, not speed, focus narrowing. "And in blood," Dumbledore folded his hands. Number there it was, not a rumor, not a dodged line in a bank, not a shape behind glass, a fact. Harry did not explode. He did not shout. He looked at Dumbledore until the old wizard had to feel the weight of the silence. "You knew," Harry said. "Yes." "My mother knew." "Yes." "James knew." A pause, then, "Yes." Harry looked toward the dark window. His own reflection stared back, small on the bed and somehow not small at all. "What was his name?" Dumbledore's eyes sharpened, measuring him. "Nalin." The name landed strangely, heavy, clean, dangerous. "Where is he?" "That," Dumbledore said quietly, "is a harder question." Harry turned back. "You don't know. I know enough to worry." About him or me? Yes. Harry huffed a short breath through his nose. That at least sounded honest. Dumbledore leaned forward slightly. Your mother did what she believed would keep you safest. James supported her. They wanted you loved, Harry, not claimed. Harry's jaw tightened. Claimed. Dumbledore heard the anger in that single word and did not pretend not to. There are powers in this world, he said, and beyond it that understand blood as ownership. I have spent your life trying to keep those powers from your door. Harry looked at his own hands again, at the healing skin over impossible strength. You should have told me sooner. Yes. There was no excuse attached, no clever justification, just yes. That mattered, not enough, but some. Harry swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. Dumbledore watched without trying to stop him. I'm not staying in the dark again, Harry said. Not about Voldemort, not about Nalin, not about whatever I am. Dumbledore rose as well. Then we shall have many difficult conversations. Harry met his gaze. Good. The old wizard's expression changed then just a fraction, something like approval though threaded with concern. You have your mother's refusal to bow. Harry's mouth edged into a smile with no softness in it at all. Maybe. He walked to the window and looked out over Hogwarts under moonlight. Towers, stone, forest, sky. Somewhere out there was a dead man who wasn't gone. Somewhere beyond all of this was a father he had never met and already did not trust. And here in this castle full of secrets and moving staircases and people who kept deciding what he could handle, Harry Potter stood at 11 years old and felt the shape of his life opening like a challenge. Good, he thought. Let it. Chapter 2. The Serpent Under Stone. Harry knew the summer was going badly when Vernon Dursley stopped pretending the house belonged to him. It wasn't dramatic. Vernon still sat in his chair, still barked about bills and normality and the state of the front hedge. But every time Harry came down the stairs, the room adjusted around him first. Petunia's mouth tightened. Dudley looked up and then down again. Vernon got louder in proportion to how little anyone listened. Harry had grown over the year. Not a lot, but enough to sharpen him. Hogwarts had put food in his system, fights in his muscles, and purpose in his head. He moved like he had somewhere better to be even when he was standing still. The Dursleys hated that almost more than the magic. The first morning back from school, Vernon had tried to lay down new rules over breakfast. No funny business, he'd said, gripping his knife and fork as if they were legal authority. No owls, no strangers, no of that nonsense under my roof. Harry had sat across from him with his glasses pushed up into his hair and a piece of toast in one hand. You should write that down, he'd said. Vernon's mustache twitched. What? So when none of it works, you can look back and feel properly foolish. Petunia had made a wounded noise. Dudley had snorted milk through his nose, trying not to laugh, and then gone pale when Vernon turned on him. After that, the house settled into armed silence. Harry didn't bother trying to please them. That ship had sunk years ago, and he had no intention of diving after it. He read in his room, flew at night when the street had gone dark, and spent long stretches on the roof staring at the sky. Flying without a broom had stopped feeling like a trick. It felt normal. That was the part he kept turning over, not the power itself, the ease of it. The way his body knew what to do before thought caught up. He could push off the chimney stack and hang above Privet Drive in the cool dark while every house below sat asleep and stupid and small, and in those moments the question of blood stopped being abstract. Nalin. Dumbledore had given him a name and not much else. Harry had written it down in the back of one of his old school exercise books and stared at it until the letters looked like a challenge. He had also written another word beside it after a trip to the Hogwarts library before term ended. Viltrumite. It had taken him 3 nights of sneaking through the restricted section to find it, not in any proper textbook, in a damaged translation of a 600-year-old star chart from a French wizard who claimed he'd met red-eyed conquerors from beyond the firmament. Most of the account was rubbish. Astrology, fear, bad poetry. But one line had stuck. Their blood endures pressure, distance, and war as if born for all 3. Harry had closed the book and sat there in the dark with his pulse drumming in his ears. So his father wasn't just some secret wizard Dumbledore disliked. He wasn't from here. That should have been impossible. Then again, so was half of Harry's life. He was turning this over one hot July evening when a sharp crack split the silence of his bedroom. Harry didn't flinch. He turned from the window and found a small creature in a pillowcase standing on his desk. Big green eyes, bat ears, trembling hands. It looked at him like he was a loaded cannon. Harry took his feet off the windowsill and stood. The creature squeaked and wrung its hands. "Harry Potter must not be angry with Dobby, sir. Dobby had to come." Harry crossed the room and shut the door behind him. "You broke into my room." Dobby looked briefly offended by the phrasing. "Dobby is a house elf, sir. Dobby can go most places." Harry leaned against the door. "Good for Dobby, start talking." The elf swallowed hard. "Harry Potter must not go back to Hogwarts." Harry waited. Dobby blinked. "Sir, that's it. There is a plot, sir, a dreadful plot. Great harm will happen at Hogwarts this year. Harry Potter must stay away for his own safety." Harry folded his arms. "You came all this way to tell me I should hide." Dobby's ears drooped. "To survive, sir." Harry started laughing, not kindly. Dobby looked more alarmed with every second of it. "I don't hide," Harry said at last. "Try again." The elf's fingers twisted in the pillowcase. "If Harry Potter goes back, there will be danger. There will be old hatred. There will be blood on the walls and fear in the halls, and everyone will look at Harry Potter and say—" He stopped himself so hard his teeth clicked. Harry's eyes narrowed. "Say what?" Dobby backed onto the edge of the desk. "Dobby cannot say." "Who told you?" "Dobby cannot say that either." Harry pushed off the door and came closer. Dobby stared up at him, clearly fighting the urge to vanish. "Then tell me what you can." The elf licked his lips. "Ancient things are stirring at Hogwarts, things that hate mudbloods and half-bloods and all who do not belong, things that listen to old names." "Whose names?" Dobby made a miserable noise. "Please, sir." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "You're scared." Dobby nodded once violently. "For me?" The elf hesitated. "No," Harry said before he could answer. "Not just me." Dobby looked miserable enough to cry. "Interesting." Harry tilted his head. "You think if I go back I'll be blamed?" Dobby's eyes widened. That was answer enough. Harry went still. At Privet Drive he was used to fear. It was simple there. The Dursleys were afraid of anything that broke their little idea of the world. Hogwarts had been different, better, but not clean. He'd seen the looks after the flying lesson, heard the murmurs after Quirrell died. Some people admired strength, some feared it. A few did both at once. If something attacked students this year and Harry happened to be the famous boy who could fly without a broom, smash trolls into the floor and ask uncomfortable questions about his blood, yes. He could see how that story might go. Dobby watched him think and twisted his fingers harder. "Harry Potter is kind. Harry Potter would try to save everyone. That will make it worse." Harry's mouth twitched. "That your warning, I'm too helpful. Harry Potter is too visible." That one landed. Harry walked back to the window. Outside, Privet Drive glowed under yellow street lamps in stupid peace. "Who are your masters?" Dobby clapped both hands over his mouth. Harry looked over his shoulder. "That answer, then," the elf whimpered. "Malfoy," Harry said. Dobby made a strangled noise and began hitting his forehead against the wardrobe. Harry caught him on the second impact. It happened fast. Dobby tried to vanish. Harry moved first, one hand closing around the elf's little wrist before the magic took. The air popped and sparked. Nothing happened. Dobby stared at their joined hands in horror. Harry stared too. "Well," he said softly, "that's new." House elf magic bucked once against his grip like a trapped animal. Then it died. Not died entirely. Bent. Refused. Dobby looked up at Harry as if some private nightmare had just learned his address. "You stopped it." Harry let him go. Dobby fell backward onto the desk, clutching his wrist with both hands. "You stopped elf magic. I noticed. No wizard can do that." Harry thought of old French star charts and a name written in the dark. Maybe not a wizard then. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Listen carefully. I'm going back to Hogwarts. If something ugly is coming, all the more reason. If your masters are involved, I'll deal with them too. If there's something you can tell me without your head exploding, do it now." Dobby's enormous eyes filled with panic and a kind of fierce devotion Harry still didn't understand. "There is a chamber, sir. There is a memory. There is a servant who wants the school to eat itself from the inside." Harry leaned forward. "What chamber?" Dobby gasped and slapped his own hands over his ears. Dobby can't, footsteps thudded in the hall. Vernon's voice boomed through the door. Boy, keep it down in there. Harry didn't bother answering. Dobby jumped at the sound, then looked toward the dining room window with sudden alarm. The guests, Harry frowned. What guests? Too late. Downstairs, Petunia laughed the brittle laugh she only used for neighbors and people she wanted to impress. Vernon's oily sales voice rolled after it. Dobby stood on the desk in mounting panic. They must not think Harry Potter can return to Hogwarts. He pointed a finger toward the window. A decorative pudding rose off the tray downstairs. Harry saw it through the sliver of sightline between rooftops, understood at once, and moved. He hit the door so hard the latch sheared off. He took the stairs in 3 steps, crossed the hall, and burst into the dining room just as the pudding sailed toward the well-dressed woman in Aunt Petunia's best chair. Harry caught it in both hands. Cream splashed up his sleeves. Cherries bounced off Vernon's forehead. The whole table froze. Aunt Petunia stared. Vernon looked ready to suffer a fatal vein event. The guests looked at Harry holding a floating pudding that should not have been floating and had now definitely been caught by a boy who had not used a ladder. Harry set it carefully back on the tray. Well, he said, that was dramatic. Upstairs, there was a muffled thump of a house elf colliding with something in despair. The silence in the room became almost beautiful. Vernon stood so fast his chair tipped over. Out. Harry licked cream off one thumb and looked at him. You invited boring people into the house. I was trying to help. The woman gave a tiny, horrified squeak. Her husband rose too, staring between Harry and the dessert like one might attack. Vernon, boy, Vernon roared. Get out. Harry considered arguing for the exercise of it, but then a different sound cut through the room. Tap, tap, tap. An owl hit the dining room window with the stubborn determination of a tax collector and glared in through the glass with a scarlet envelope in its beak. Petunia made a noise halfway between a gasp and a prayer. Harry grinned. The owl dropped the envelope the moment he opened the window. It snapped at Vernon's reaching hand, then flew off into the evening. The red envelope trembled on the floorboards. Harry bent, picked it up, and turned it over. The wax seal had the ministry stamp on it. Oh, this should be good. Don't open that in here, Vernon hissed. Harry broke the seal anyway. The howler unfolded itself in his hands and boomed with enough force to rattle the china. Harry Potter. The guests yelped and nearly climbed over each other. We have received intelligence that a hover charm was used at your place of residence this evening, 18:12 p.m. Harry leaned against the sideboard and listened. As you know, underage wizards are not permitted to perform magic outside school. He looked up toward the ceiling where Dobby was presumably hyperventilating inside a wardrobe and smiled without warmth. Further spellwork on your part may lead to expulsion from Hogwarts. The letter burst into flame and died. Vernon's face had gone shiny with triumph and terror. Expelled. Harry looked at him. Number what? I didn't cast it, and if they try, I'll point that out. Petunia found enough nerve to hiss. You'll do no such thing, you'll stay right here and... Number. Harry wiped cream from his hands onto Vernon's good napkin. I'm going back. The guests were already backing toward the door with expressions that suggested they would never again eat pudding within 3 miles of Surrey. By the time Vernon worked himself up enough to storm upstairs, Dobby had vanished. Harry found only one thing left behind. A pressed black feather on the windowsill, glossy and heavy, not remotely owl-like. He turned it over in his fingers. There was no note, no explanation, just the feather and the warning, a chamber, a memory, a servant, and now apparently old names. The bars went on Harry's window the next morning. Vernon supervised them personally while muttering under his breath about institutions and reform schools and the police. He locked Harry in with a tray of cold soup and announced through the door that if Hogwarts wanted him, Hogwarts could come break the house down themselves. Harry looked at the bars. Then he looked at Hedwig, who clicked her beak in obvious offense from atop the wardrobe. Bit much, he said. She clicked again. Harry waited until the house settled after dark. Then he wrapped his hands around the bars and pulled. Metal came free with a shriek of torn screws and bent like wet wire. He dropped the whole frame onto the bed, picked up his trunk, and stepped onto the sill. There was a cough from outside. Harry looked down. Fred and George Weasley were hanging half out of the flying Ford Anglia with matching expressions of delight. "Told you he wouldn't still be in there," Fred said. George looked up at the twisted bars on the bed. Honestly, that was optimistic of them. Ron leaned over from the front passenger seat, hair wild and grin wide. "You coming or what?" Harry climbed out with his trunk in one hand. From downstairs came Vernon's roar as he heard the car engine. Harry looked toward the sound, then calmly dropped to the lawn without bending his knees much. Fred whistled. "Never gets old." Vernon smashed open the back door just as Harry was loading his trunk into the car. "You," Harry straightened. The yellow porch light made Vernon look soft and furious, and entirely too convinced volume counted as force. "Get back inside. Number, you are not leaving with them." Harry shut the boot. "Then it's lucky you don't get a vote." Vernon stomped across the lawn and grabbed Harry's shoulder. He regretted it instantly. Harry didn't even look down. He just caught Vernon's wrist, peeled it off, and turned enough to make the message obvious. The twins went very quiet. So did Ron. They'd heard stories. Hearing wasn't the same as seeing. Vernon tried to wrench free. Harry held him there 1 second longer than necessary and then let go. "Don't do that again," Harry said. The words were soft, final. Vernon stumbled back. Harry got into the car. As the Anglia rose, Dudley appeared in his upstairs window, pale and wide-eyed behind the curtain. Petunia stood farther back in the shadows like she couldn't decide whether she looked relieved or abandoned. Harry didn't wave. The car climbed through dark air. Surrey fell away under them. Ron kept glancing over, not because of the bars, that part seemed to impress everyone roughly the same amount, but because Harry wasn't even out of breath. "Dad's going to lose his mind," Ron said finally. "Mum too, but in a different way." Harry settled back in the seat. "She can cue." Fred twisted around from the front. "That's the spirit." The burrow hit Harry like a warm punch to the chest. Not because it was grand, it was. It leaned at angles that seemed to have given up explaining themselves years ago. Chickens wandered where they liked. Lights glowed in crooked windows. The whole place smelled like summer and onions and people who actually wanted one another around. Molly Weasley met them at the door in a dressing gown and slippers with fury blazing in her eyes. "What?" she said in a voice that could have stripped paint. "Do you think you were all doing?" Fred opened his mouth. "Number," George tried. "Number." Ron looked desperate enough to dive behind Harry, which in fairness was not a terrible instinct. Molly's gaze landed on Harry. It softened, but only a little. "And you don't think being famous gets you out of this?" Harry almost smiled. "Wouldn't dream of it." That seemed to save him. She hauled all 4 of them inside, fed Harry so much food he started to suspect it was a strategy, and only then allowed herself to properly be furious. Arthur Weasley returned from work halfway through the lecture and got distracted by the flying car before Molly nearly bit his head off too. Ginny sat at the table in her nightdress, trying not to stare at Harry and failing completely. At some point during Molly's attack on her son's decision-making, Harry reached across the table, took a buttered roll from the basket, and put it on Ginny's plate because she'd clearly been too nervous to grab one herself. Ginny looked at the roll as if he'd handed her a live dragon. "Thanks," she muttered. Harry shrugged. "You looked hungry." Ron made a strangled noise like he'd just realized his sister might never be normal again. By the time the house quieted, Harry had learned 3 things. 1. Someone had been intercepting his mail. 2. Hermione had sent 6 letters and was furious. 3. The Weasley clock had moved Harry's hand onto home the moment he walked through the door, and Molly had gone very still when she noticed. She didn't comment on it, neither did he. The next week moved fast. Diagon Alley hummed hotter than it had last year. Harry could feel the attention before he saw it. Heads turned in the street. Shopkeepers straightened. A witch in plum robes nearly dropped her parcels when he passed. He had expected the usual recognition. He had not expected the whispers. "That's him, yes. Heard he flew the whole Quidditch pitch without. Not natural that. Potter blood's one thing, but there are stories." Harry kept walking. Ron heard enough to flush red. "Ignore them." "I am." "You don't look like you are." "I'm memorizing who says what." That shut Ron up. Hermione found them outside Flourish and Blots and hugged Harry before seeming to remember herself. "You look taller," she said briskly. "So do you." "I know." Ron rolled his eyes. "Here we go." The bookshop was already crowded around Gilderoy Lockhart's signing table. Gold letters, brighter smile, too much hair. Harry took one look and disliked him on instinct. Lockhart noticed him instantly. Of course he did. Well, 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 he boomed, loud enough for everyone in the shop to hear. If it isn't Harry Potter, Harry considered leaving. Too late. Lockhart had swept him forward into the middle of the crowd and planted him beside the stack of his own books before Harry could decide whether open violence was worth the paperwork. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lockhart called, beaming for the cameras. What an unforgettable moment. "The famous Harry Potter here to buy my entire collection." "I'm not," Harry said. The nearest photographer nearly swallowed his flash powder trying not to laugh. Lockhart's grin twitched. "Ha, a sense of humor." Harry slid out of the man's grip. "Number, I just don't know you." The tension in the crowd shifted. A few people snorted. One old wizard openly cackled. Lockhart recovered with professional smoothness, but his eyes sharpened. "Well, you will, everyone does. Sounds exhausting." Ron folded over against a shelf. Hermione elbowed him hard and failed to hide her own smile. That was when Lucius Malfoy arrived. The room didn't quiet all at once. It chilled. He moved through the crowd in dark tailored robes with Draco at his side and a polished cane in one hand. White blonde hair, pale eyes, a face too controlled to be trusted. Harry turned before Lucius reached them. Lucius noticed. Interest flickered. "Mr. Potter," he said. "Malfoy," Draco bristled. Lucius did not. Arthur Weasley had just stepped around a shelf with armfuls of second-hand books and nearly walked into him. The temperature in the room dropped another degree. "Lucius," Arthur said. "Arthur." Lucius glanced at the books. "Hard times." Arthur's ears went red. "At least I'm buying them for my children, not bribing school governors." Molly inhaled sharply. People nearest them edged backward. Lucius's smile remained smooth. Always the same dreary righteousness. He turned his attention back to Harry as if selecting the more interesting of two available weapons. "I hear Hogwarts was eventful for you last year." Harry met his gaze. "You hear a lot. Occupational hazard of being informed. Must be tiring. Most gossip is stupid." Draco looked scandalized. Lucius looked amused. Then his gaze drifted to Ginny's cauldron in the stack beside Molly. Old schoolbooks, ink stains, cheap lock. His gloved fingers touched the top of the pile for a second while Arthur snapped something about ministry raids. Harry saw it, just a touch. Light, casual, something small and black slipped between two books and vanished. Lucius moved his hand away before anyone else noticed. Harry's eyes narrowed. Lucius saw that too. Their gaze locked for one hard second across the noise and clutter. Lucius did not smile this time. Interesting, Harry thought. Very. The ride to King's Cross should have been easy after that. Instead, Harry and Ron hit the barrier at platform 9 3/4 and bounced off solid brick. Ron crashed onto his backside with a yelp. Harry landed on his feet. The train whistle sounded from somewhere beyond the wall. Ron went white. Mum and Dad are already gone through. Harry put a hand against the barrier. Stone, cold, sealed, Dobby. He almost admired the commitment. Ron was babbling now. "If we miss the train, if they'll think we missed the train. They'll expel us." Harry looked at him. "For transport failure. It's Hogwarts. They expel people for breathing weird." Harry grabbed Ron's trunk with one hand and his own with the other. "Come on." Ron stared. "Where?" "To school." "That's in Scotland." Harry started walking toward the car park. "Then we should hurry." The Anglia fit the plan because there was no point making things difficult when ridiculous was available. Ron, still panicking, got behind the wheel. Harry tossed the trunks into the back, climbed onto the running board and looked at the train tracks cutting north through London. The car jerked into the air. Ron gripped the steering wheel like it had insulted his family. "You know, most people would call this mad. Most people are boring." The engine coughed over York. By Durham it started making a noise like a dragon with a chest infection. Ron's face went gray. "No, no, no." Harry put one hand on the roof. "Keep steering." "What? Steer?" Ron did because the alternatives had narrowed quickly. Harry pushed. The car surged forward with a howl of protesting metal, then steadied as if caught in an invisible current. Clouds tore around them. The Hogwarts Express smoked along below, scarlet on silver tracks, children's faces plastered to the windows as they shot overhead. Ron looked at him, then at the speedometer, then back. "You are completely mental, probably." When Hogwarts rose out of the afternoon mist, the car finally gave up and began dropping. Ron shouted something coherent only if translated from panic. The Whomping Willow reared below them, all violent branches and bad attitude. Harry kicked the door open before impact. He hauled Ron clear by the front of his robes as the car smashed through leaves and spun. They hit the lawn hard enough to rip trenches through the grass. The Anglia lurched upright, glared at them with both headlights, and drove into the forest in deep mechanical offense. Ron lay in the dirt blinking at the sky. Harry stood up, brushed himself off, and offered a hand. Ron stared at it. "Did you just tow a car through half of Britain?" Harry hauled him up. "Would you have preferred walking?" Professor Snape and Professor McGonagall were waiting in the entrance hall with faces that suggested the answer to most questions was currently detention. McGonagall's lips were pressed so tightly together they might never separate again. Snape looked almost pleased in the way snakes probably felt before swallowing. "You flew a Muggle car to Hogwarts," McGonagall said. Ron opened his mouth. Harry cut in. "The barrier was sealed." McGonagall blinked once. "Sealed?" "Yes." "That does not improve matters. It explains them." Snape's black eyes slid to Harry. "And your explanation for the reports that the vehicle outpaced the Hogwarts Express over Yorkshire." Harry leaned one shoulder against the wall. "It wasn't going very fast." Ron made a noise halfway to death. McGonagall shut her eyes briefly. "Mr. Potter, it's true." When Dumbledore arrived at the end of the lecture, he did not look especially surprised. That was almost insulting. "The platform was closed to you?" he asked. Harry met his gaze. "Yes." "By what means?" "I have a short list." Dumbledore's eyes flicked over his face, measuring. "I see." Harry almost said, "Do you?" but decided he was saving that tone for later. Their punishment came in the form of a warning, a letter to Molly, and a hard stare from McGonagall that promised a future reckoning. Ron looked devastated. Harry looked at Dumbledore until the headmaster paused in the doorway. "Something else?" Dumbledore asked. "Yes," Harry said. "You're still not telling me enough." The room went quiet. McGonagall looked scandalized. Snape looked interested despite himself. Dumbledore only folded his hands into his sleeves. "And yet I suspect I am telling you more than most would dare." "That's not the same as enough." "No," Dumbledore agreed. "It is." Then he left, robes whispering over stone. Ron waited until the door shut. "You know you can't talk to him like that." Harry looked at him. "I just did." Hogwarts took the news of Harry's arrival exactly the way Hogwarts took all scandal. Loudly, inaccurately, and with deep personal investment. By breakfast the next morning, half the school believed he had raced the train on purpose. The other half believed he defought the Whomping Willow barehanded, and Colin Creevey had appeared with a camera and the sort of expression people wore when presented with living mythology. Harry, if I could just get a quick photo." "Number, oh, right. Sorry." Colin looked crushed for nearly 3 full seconds. "Could I get one later?" "Probably still number, brilliant." He scampered off as if this had gone very well. Hermione arrived from the girls' staircase looking appalled. "You flew here in a Muggle car." "The wall was shut." "You still flew here in a Muggle car." Harry handed her the toast rack. "You sound jealous." She took a slice automatically and realized it too late. Ron snorted pumpkin juice. Things might have settled into normal school absurdity if the first message hadn't appeared on Halloween. Until then there had only been pressure, whispers, eyes turning when Harry walked by. A Slytherin 7th year loudly asking in the corridor whether broomless flight counted as part human. A pair of Ravenclaws arguing in charms over whether Harry's strength was magical augmentation or something more biological. Lockhart repeatedly trying to corner Harry into being photographed with him and being repeatedly disappointed. Then Dobby decided to murder him with sports equipment. The rogue bludger came at Harry in Quidditch practice with the kind of personal malice that took effort. He saw it after the first pass, dipped around it, and went for the snitch anyway. The bludger followed. Alicia shouted a warning, George swore, Oliver Wood went white. Harry twisted off the broom just as the iron ball screamed past his ear and punched through one of the goal hoops. He caught up to it in the same motion, planted both feet against the side of it in midair, and drove it straight down into the pitch. The impact blasted a crater in the grass. The bludger bounced once, cracked down the middle, and came apart in two smoking halves. Silence fell over the stadium. Fred floated closer on his broom, staring at the wreckage below. "You know, we do usually return those." Harry landed and looked toward the edge of the pitch, where a pair of huge eyes peered through the stands. Dobby vanished with a crack the moment Harry spotted him. That evening Harry found him in an unused classroom trying to punish himself with a curtain rod. He took the rod away. Dobby wailed. "Harry Potter was almost hurt. Dobby is a bad elf. You aimed a homicidal cannonball at my head. To save Harry Potter's life." Harry rubbed one hand over his face. "That logic needs work." Dobby lowered his hands just enough to look at him. "The danger is waking up, sir. The school is being prepared. The fear is already there." "Prepared by who?" Dobby bit both lips at once. Harry crouched so they were eye level. "Listen, you can keep hurting yourself and talking in riddles, or you can help me stop whatever your masters started. Which sounds smarter?" Dobby's ears drooped. "Dobby does not know if it can be stopped." Harry smiled without any real humor. "That's not what I asked." The elf stared at him, and for one odd second Harry thought Dobby might actually start trusting him. Then footsteps passed in the corridor and the moment snapped. Dobby backed away with panic surging up again. "There is an heir, sir. There is a thing under the school that remembers blood, and there are people who would be very happy if it chose the wrong enemy." Before Harry could move, the elf vanished. An heir. A thing under the school. Harry went straight from that conversation to the Halloween feast. By the time he and Ron arrived at the Great Hall after nearly Headless Nick's death day party, students were spilling out into the corridor in a wave of noise and confusion. Harry heard the screaming before he saw the crowd split. Mrs. Norris hung by her tail from a torch bracket, rigid and glassy-eyed. Below her, daubed in paint on the wall, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir, beware." The corridor froze around the words. Then people began noticing Harry. He had come through the crowd fast because that was how he moved when something was wrong. He stood closest to the wall, face lit by torchlight, scar bright under his hair. Next to a message about an heir. Near a cat who had not died but looked wrong enough that most people couldn't tell. He felt the shift in them like weather. Justin Finch Fletchley took one involuntary step back. Ernie Macmillan stared from the words to Harry's face and went pale. Draco Malfoy, several rows behind them, looked far too interested. Filch arrived a second later, saw his cat and lost his mind. "You've murdered her." Harry did not dignify that with an answer. "Argus," Dumbledore said sharply, stepping through the crowd with McGonagall and Snape at his heels. "She is not dead." Filch made a choking sound. "He was there." "So were a great many students," Dumbledore said, "but the damage was done." Harry could hear it in the breathing around him, in the silence that held too hard. He looked at the words on the wall, then at the cat, then at the corridor itself. Pipes, stone, and underneath it all, so faint he might have imagined it, a whisper like scales over brick. "Come!" Harry's head snapped up. He was moving before anyone could stop him. He crossed the corridor and punched the wall beside the message. Stone exploded inward. Girls screamed. Filch shrieked. Dust poured through a jagged hole where a pipe shaft ran dark behind the masonry. Harry looked into it. Nothing there now. Only darkness and the fading sensation of something huge moving away. McGonagall seized his shoulder. "Potter," he turned, jaw tight. "What?" she demanded, glancing from the broken wall to his face. "Did you think you were doing? Listening." "To what?" Harry looked back at the hole. He almost lied. Then he remembered Dobby's warning and all those eyes on him and decided he was done making himself smaller for other people's comfort. "There's something in the walls," he said. "A voice." The corridor went dead. Draco's smile came slow as poison. McGonagall stared. Snape's expression sharpened instantly. Dumbledore did not look surprised enough, which annoyed Harry more than anything else currently happening. Filch made the sign against evil. "Take the students to their dormitories," Dumbledore said. Now, the story spread faster because Harry didn't deny it. That was the strange thing. If he'd panicked, whispered, begged, maybe some of them would have left it alone. But he sat at breakfast the next morning, and when Dean asked if it was true he heard a voice in the walls, Harry simply said, "Yes." The entire Gryffindor table froze around him. Hermione set down her spoon. "What kind of voice?" "Serpentine," Harry said. "Old, angry." Ron swallowed visibly. That is not reassuring. By lunch, Hufflepuff had decided Harry was either cursed or helping the heir. By dinner, Slytherin had split between those who found the whole thing hilarious and those who had started looking at him with a new, speculative kind of respect that made Harry want to hit someone. The dueling club made everything worse. Lockhart announced it with so much theatrical nonsense Harry briefly considered skipping out of principle, but Snape's presence made him stay. If there was a chance of learning something useful, he'd take it, even if it had to be wrapped in Lockhart's hair. The first part of the evening was exactly as embarrassing as expected. Lockhart got disarmed by Snape so hard half the room winced in sympathy. Then students paired off. Naturally, Harry ended up opposite Draco Malfoy. "Try not to cry this time," Draco said, rolling his shoulders like he thought that counted as threatening. Harry raised his wand. "Try not to need your father to complain for you." The crowd made a vicious little sound. Draco's spell came fast and sloppy. Harry knocked it aside, stepped inside the second one, and disarmed him on reflex. Draco's wand hit the floor before half the room had processed movement. Draco's face flamed. "Pick it up," Harry said. That should have been the end of it. Snape, however, leaned in with a silky voice and suggested serpents to the deeply stupid. Draco pointed his wand and a long black snake burst onto the floor between the duelists. Students scattered at once. The snake reared, hissing body nodding to strike at a terrified Justin Finch-Fletchley. Harry heard the hiss, understood it. It was not translation, not exactly. More like the shape of intent slid straight into his bones, afraid, strike, fangs, warmth. He stepped forward before anyone else could. "Leave him," Harry snapped. The words came out in a sibilant rush that filled the hall. The snake stilled. So did everyone else. Justin stared at Harry like he had just torn off a human mask and shown scales underneath. Harry felt the silence hit and knew at once what they had heard. Not shouting, not English, Parseltongue. He looked around at the faces, shocked, frightened, fascinated, and irritation flared hot and clean. The snake lowered its head. Harry pointed to the side of the room. "Go." It slithered away at once. No one moved, then someone whispered, "He's talking to it." Draco's eyes glittered with ugly triumph. Justin backed straight into Ernie Macmillan. Harry could have tried to explain, could have apologized, could have played the bewildered child. Instead, he looked at the whole room and said, "What?" It was about to bite him. No one answered. Lockhart looked as if he would have preferred to vanish. Snape's expression had gone unreadable in the worst possible way. Harry turned and walked out before any teacher could call him back. Hermione and Ron caught up in the corridor at a half-run. "Harry," Hermione hissed, "you speak Parseltongue, apparently." Ron's freckles stood out stark on his face. "That's bad. It's a language. It's the language of dark wizards." Harry stopped so suddenly both of them nearly ran into him. "No," he said. "It's the language of snakes. Dark wizards use it because snakes don't care about their reputations." Hermione pressed 2 fingers to her forehead. "You are missing the social problem." "I know the social problem. The social problem is everyone here acts like they've never heard anything they didn't understand before." "That's not helping," Ron said. Harry looked back toward the hall where the whispers had already started again. "Good, I'm not trying to help them." The school tightened after that. Some students stopped speaking when Harry walked into a room. Others whispered louder. Lockhart sent a note inviting Harry to discuss the burdens of misunderstood fame. Harry burned it. McGonagall watched him in transfiguration with the face of a woman trying to grade an avalanche. And the voice in the walls kept coming back. Never when Harry wanted it, always when he least expected. A hiss under the floor in Charms. A whisper down a pipe in the second-floor corridor. Once in the library, a low predatory murmur behind the shelves that made every hair on his arm stand up. Kill Tear, come, each time he moved fast. Each time he hit stone, ran corridors, followed sound through air vents and old plumbing and hidden spaces no one else seemed to notice. Each time he was too late. By the time Colin Creevey was found petrified beside a pool of developing potion, and Justin Finch-Fletchley vanished from sight whenever Harry entered a room, nobody needed much pushing to decide what frightened them. Harry wasn't actually worried about being accused. He was angry about losing time. Hermione understood that before Ron did. They took over a corner of the library and started working properly. Not gossip, not panic, research. If the chamber was real, it had a history. If something moved through the castle unseen, it used a route. If it was targeting Muggle-borns, there was motive older than random cruelty. Hermione built lists. Ron learned the legends. Harry listened. That was the useful part. He sat still in deserted corridors while the others read and waited for the whisper to come back. Some nights it did. When it did, he followed it at full speed, cutting through secret passages, smashing through locked doors, once driving his fist through a section of decorative paneling to expose a pipe wide enough for a man to crawl through. McGonagall gave him detention for that. He accepted it and asked for maps of the old sewer plans. She stared at him for a long time and finally said, "You are not making it easy to defend you, Potter." He met her gaze. "Then stop defending me and help me." For one sharp second she looked like she might. Then rules won, the way they often did with adults who had built themselves around institutions. "Go to detention." Harry left without arguing. That night, however, Dumbledore asked him to his office. The room was circular and full of silver instruments that clicked and hummed like they were gossiping about him. Fawkes the Phoenix watched from his perch with unsettlingly bright eyes. Dumbledore stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back. "You are angry with me again," he said. Harry shut the door. "Still. Consistent. You know something about the chamber. I know the legend. You know more than that." Dumbledore turned. "There are times, Harry, when knowledge becomes combustible depending on who hears it." Harry crossed the room. "Then stop leaving it in reach of other people." Dumbledore's gaze sharpened. "That is a very different question." "Good, answer it." A quiet stretched. Then Dumbledore walked to his desk, opened one drawer, and took out a thin black file bound with silver cord. He placed it on the wood between them. Harry looked at it. "Read the first page," Dumbledore said. Harry untied the cord. Most of the writing was in neat bureaucratic script, old enough that the ink had browned at the edges. Extraplanetary contact risk assessment subject. Nalin Grayson species designation, contested among departmental archives. Viltrumite threat capacity, catastrophic. Harry's pulse kicked once. He looked up. Dumbledore said nothing. Harry read on. Fragments. Not a life story, not even close. More like the panicked remains of meetings full of people deciding how much truth other people should survive. Nalin had appeared on Earth before Harry was born, not to wizards specifically, to the planet. There were hints of battles in places the wizarding world had quietly erased from general record. Broken mountains, governments influenced. A withdrawal from direct engagement after private domestic entanglement. Lily Potter's name appeared exactly 3 times. Harry's jaw tightened. Domestic entanglement. Dumbledore did not defend the phrasing. Ministry documents are often written by cowards trying to sound objective. Harry looked back down. On the final paragraph of the page, one line had been underlined twice by someone angrier than the rest. Recommendation: if child issue confirmed, identity must be contained. Wizarding Britain is unequipped for public awareness of non-human sovereign bloodline within the boy who lived narrative. Harry set the page flat on the desk very carefully. "You all knew." "Yes." "Contained." Dumbledore's eyes stayed on him. "I did not write that word." "You let it stand." A beat passed. "Yes," Dumbledore said. Harry laughed under his breath. "At least you're honest when it hurts." "Only when I'm learning." Harry closed the file. "What does this have to do with the chamber?" Dumbledore rested one hand on the desk. "Fear seeks useful shapes. This school already contains old blood prejudices, old stories about founders and purity and hidden monsters. Add a famous boy who flies unaided, breaks iron by accident, hears snakes in the walls, and possesses a lineage no one can explain without inviting larger panic. He let that trail off. Harry finished it for him. "The right enemy." "Yes." The words sat in the room like cold iron. Harry looked toward Fawkes, then back. If you knew that, why didn't you warn me before school started? Because warning you would not have changed your choice. Number, it may have changed other people's. Harry bared his teeth slightly. Let them try. Something in Dumbledore almost smiled. Almost, but Harry was not done. Why can I speak to snakes? This time Dumbledore's silence lasted longer. Then he said, some of that answer belongs to Voldemort. Harry went very still. The night he failed to kill you, Dumbledore continued, he left more than a scar, a mark of connection. It may have opened a channel in you that would otherwise have stayed dormant. Harry thought of the first time he'd heard the voice and not been afraid. Thought of the thing in Quirrell's skull recoiling from him. Thought of the diary black feather on his windowsill. Great, he said. So my family situation is contagious. An inelegant summary, but not entirely inaccurate. Harry stared at him. Then, despite everything, he huffed a laugh. Dumbledore looked absurdly relieved. The attacks worsened after Christmas. Not in body count, in pressure, that was smarter. Harry had to give the enemy that. No one had died, not yet. Mrs. Norris, Colin, a Hufflepuff girl from 4th year. Nearly headless Nick, which had taken effort and a very particular kind of malice. Enough to terrify without tipping the school into total closure. Enough to leave everyone waiting for the next scream. Lucius Malfoy arrived twice in that span, both times on school business, both times looking politely concerned in a way that made Harry want to test whether his cane would snap as cleanly as a broomstick. The second visit ended with Dumbledore removed as headmaster by order of the governors. Harry found out because the castle changed. Teachers spoke lower. Portraits whispered. The air itself felt uncertain. He intercepted Professor McGonagall on the stairs. They pushed him out. Her mouth was thin as wire. Temporarily, Malfoy, among others, Harry leaned on the banister. He's behind this. McGonagall did not ask what this meant. Accusations require proof. Number arrests do. Punching is easier. A muscle jumped in her jaw. Mr. Potter, he met her eyes. You know I'm right. Something moved in her face then, anger, yes, but not all at him. Rightness does not permit recklessness. Harry looked past her to the long windows where sleet tapped against the glass. Depends who's losing time. He left before she could answer. Hermione found the answer first. Not because she was lucky, because she was Hermione and she refused to stop while the rest of them were still circling pieces. She missed lunch 3 days in a row and came to dinner each night with ink on her hands and a look that said the world had become personally insulting. On the 4th day she slammed a library book down in front of Harry and Ron so hard the pumpkin juice jumped. Not snakes, she said. Ron blinked. What? Not just snakes, basilisk. Harry looked up at once. Hermione's eyes were bright and grim. A serpent bred by dark magic kills with direct eye contact. If you only see it reflected, you don't die, you're petrified. Mrs. Norris saw it in water. Colin through his camera. Nearly headless Nick saw it through being already dead, which is both dreadful and oddly useful. Ron had gone the color of wet flour. A basilisk is under the school. In the pipes, Hermione snapped. That's why Harry hears it. That's how it moves. That's why nobody sees it head on. Harry was already standing. Where's Ginny? Hermione froze. Ron looked at him. What? Harry's mind was moving fast now, every oddity snapping into line. Ginny pale all term, Ginny missing classes, Ginny looking sick every time one of the messages appeared, Lucius's hand on her books in flourish and blots. The memory, Harry said aloud. Hermione's face changed. The diary. What diary? Ron demanded. Ginny's, Harry said. She's been writing in one. I saw it once near breakfast, small black cover. Hermione's chair scraped backward. Harry, but he was already moving. He hit the corridor at full speed, took the stairs in a blur, and nearly ran over Professor Lockhart outside the staff room. Potter, no running in the out of the way. Lockhart squared himself with offended dignity for roughly half a second. Then Harry brushed past and the man flattened against the wall on instinct. Ginny wasn't in the common room, or the library, or the hospital wing. What Harry found instead was a fresh message on the wall outside the Gryffindor corridor. Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. Students screamed. Someone started crying. Harry stared at the words once and then turned. Ron, he barked. Ron came skidding up with Hermione at his heels, both breathing hard. One look at the message and Ron's face emptied. Harry grabbed him by the shoulders. Think, anywhere she goes when she doesn't want to be seen. Ron's eyes darted wildly. I don't know, maybe bathrooms. She cries in bathrooms sometimes. Hermione swore under her breath. Myrtle, they ran. Moaning Myrtle's bathroom stank of damp stone and old misery. The ghost herself was wailing in a sink. Where is she? Harry demanded. Myrtle popped up through a toilet. Who? Ginny Weasley, Myrtle sniffed. She was here, ugly little book too. Threw it in my toilet, very rude. Harry was already at the sink. Carved snake on one tap coiled under his hand. Behind him, Ron said hoarsely, Harry. Harry looked at the serpent and spoke in parcel tongue. Open, Stone shuddered. The sink split apart and the pipe yawned wide. Ron made a noise somewhere between awe and terror. Hermione went white but didn't step back. Lockhart chose that exact moment to bustle in, clutching his wand and a smile he had definitely rehearsed. I heard shouting and thought you'd all be desperate for my assist. He saw the open pipe. Saw the wall message. Saw Harry. The smile died. Harry pointed at the hole. Good, you're coming. Lockhart laughed weakly. Now let's not be irrational. Harry took one step toward him. Lockhart's wand came up instantly. Really, Potter, this has all gone quite far enough. He didn't finish. Ron slammed him in the side with a shoulder tackle out of pure familial panic. Lockhart went down, lost his wand, and squealed. Hermione snatched the wand before he could. Harry looked from the trembling fraud on the floor to the pipe. Ron, he said, get the teachers. Ron stared. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. Get McGonagall, get anyone useful. That could take ages. Harry smiled hard. Then I'll be quick. Without waiting for permission from anyone, he dropped into the pipe. The descent was long, wet, and violent. He hit slick stone, shoved off, slid through ancient tunnels that smelled like rot and old magic. At one turn, he braced both feet and slowed enough not to break his neck on the final drop. He landed in black water. The tunnel ahead stretched wide and old and wrong. Harry started walking. The Chamber of Secrets had clearly been built by someone who believed subtlety was for inferior bloodlines. Stone snakes towered overhead. Pillars vanished into dark. The air hung thick with old damp and something sweetly rotten underneath it. Bones littered the floor in places, rats, birds, things he didn't want to name in the dark. At the far end of the hall, beneath the giant carved face of Salazar Slytherin, Ginny Weasley lay crumpled on the stone, and beside her stood a boy. 16, maybe. Black hair, school robes, handsome in the polished, deliberate way people usually had to work at. He looked solid until Harry focused. Then the edges gave him away. Too clean, too still, light passing wrong through his outline. Tom Riddle smiled like they were meeting for tea. Hello, Harry. Harry kept moving until he stood between Ginny and the stranger. Step back. Tom's eyes flicked over him with open fascination. Oh, I was hoping you'd be less conventional. Harry crouched, touched Ginny's throat. Pulse there. Faint. Too faint, he looked up. What did you do to her? Borrowed, fed, learned. Tom tilted his head. She's been wonderfully informative, actually. Children always are with a diary, so many little fears, so many secret humiliations, so much worship when the right names come up. Harry's expression did not change. You're the memory, Tom's smile widened. Good, Dobby was useful after all. There it was, Harry straightened. Lucius Malfoy gave her the diary. Yes. Why? Because he is a frightened aristocrat with decent instincts and terrible long-term discipline. Tom began to pace with hands clasped behind his back, the picture of a student giving a lecture. He wanted Dumbledore embarrassed, governors rattled, mudbloods frightened. The school reminded what old power feels like. He did not know the diary contained me precisely, only that it was dangerous. That's the trouble with men like Lucius. They always think they can direct what they inherit. Harry glanced once at Ginny, still breathing, barely. Tom noticed. You're wondering how much time she has. I'm wondering how fast you can scream. Tom laughed. There you are, that's the part I wanted to meet. He stopped pacing. You know, he said, you've become a fascinating problem. The school fears me in your outline, a hidden heir, a boy who speaks to snakes, a child with power that does not fit the laws they're used to. It's almost elegant. Harry's hands curled. Tom kept going because he was the sort who liked hearing his own insight sharpen into a blade. I've watched them react to you. Even through a little girl's eyes it was obvious. They cheer when you save them. They whisper when you pass. They love power as long as it kneels in the right uniform. But let it stand a little too straight and suddenly they call it unnatural. Harry said nothing. Tom's smile softened into something almost sympathetic, which made it worse. That part should sound familiar. It doesn't. Liar. The word cracked through the chamber. Tom came a step closer. You're not one of them, you know that now. Dumbledore has started telling you just enough to keep you tame. A father from the stars, yes. A bloodline they hid, records they sealed, questions they wrapped in policy. They fear what that means, they should. Harry's jaw flexed once. Tom saw it and looked delighted. Ah, there it is. He turned and spread one hand toward the great stone face behind him. Imagine it, he said softly. No more begging rooms full of lesser people to trust what they can't control. No more pretending power exists to serve the frightened. You and I could do something cleaner than this shambling old school. Strong rule. Honest rule. Let the world reorder itself around reality for once. Harry looked at him the way he might look at a stain. That your pitch? Tom blinked. It's weak, Harry said. You sound like every bully who ever thought wanting something badly made it his. Tom's pleasant expression thinned. You mistake me for a schoolyard thug. Number, I'm saying you're smaller. For the first time, real anger flashed in Tom Riddle's face. Good, Harry thought. Tom raised the diary in one hand, a plain black notebook, innocent-looking enough to make the whole thing almost funny. You know what I think? I think you're angry because I'm right. Not about me. About them. About what they'll do once fear finishes ripening. They won't try to kill you first, Harry. They'll try to define you, contain you, study you, use you. Harry moved one step closer. Tom's mouth curved again, triumphant. And if they fail, he said, they'll beg you not to become what you were clearly born to be. Harry looked at Ginny, then back to Tom. You keep talking like I need permission. Tom's smile slipped. Harry lifted one hand and crooked two fingers. Open it, he said. Tom's eyes narrowed. What? The chamber, the monster, whatever you've got. Harry's voice dropped lower, colder. Open it. For one brief second, Tom looked genuinely uncertain. Then his expression hardened. As you wish. He turned toward the carved face of Slytherin and hissed in Parseltongue. The stone mouth opened. The basilisk came out like a landslide wearing scales. It was enormous, longer than the chamber columns, thick as a tree trunk through the middle. Its hide slid over the floor with the slow confidence of something that had never had to hurry for food. Its yellow eyes locked on Harry. He did not look away. Tom's laugh rang out. Kill him. The serpent struck. Harry met it head-on. He launched forward in the same instant, hitting the basilisk just behind the jaw with enough force to crack the nearest column from top to bottom. Stone rained down. The basilisk reeled with a scream of hissing fury and whipped its body around in a blur that would have cut an ordinary wizard in half. Harry caught the tail. It slammed him through two fallen pillars and across the floor. He came up grinning. All right, he said, wiping blood from the corner of his mouth. There you are. The basilisk charged again. Harry ducked under the fangs, drove both hands into the underside of its head, and heaved. For one impossible second, the whole front half of the creature rose off the floor. Tom's expression changed. Harry twisted and hurled the basilisk sideways into a bank of stone snakes. Granite exploded. The chamber boomed. The serpent came back faster this time, fury replacing ancient certainty. Its mouth opened wide enough to swallow Harry to the waist. A flash of scarlet fire burst overhead. Fawkes dropped out of it like living flame. The phoenix screamed once and went for the basilisk's eyes. Talons hit. Beak struck. The basilisk convulsed, hissing in sudden agony. One yellow eye burst. Then the other. Tom shouted in fury. No. Blind now, the basilisk thrashed, smashing pillars, tearing up stone, flooding the chamber with debris. Harry used the chaos. He drove in close, got both hands under one upper fang and pulled. The basilisk bucked like a collapsing bridge. Venom sprayed the floor in smoking arcs. Harry planted his feet and tore the fang free in a wet crack that shook his arms to the shoulder. The serpent slammed him with the side of its skull and sent him skidding 50 feet. He hit a column hard enough to crater it, then kicked off and flew back before the beast could reorient. Tom was shouting in Parseltongue, trying to direct it by sound. Harry grabbed the basilisk's lower jaw with one hand and the upper skull with the other. The whole chamber seemed to stop. Then Harry pulled. Bones screamed. The basilisk writhed, coiling around him, crushing stone under its weight. One fang grazed his side this time, slicing through robes and skin. White-hot venom burned into the wound. Harry's vision flashed. He pulled harder. The basilisk's jaw ripped open with a sickening crack. The creature gave one final convulsion and collapsed across the chamber in a mountain of dead muscle and scales. Silence crashed down after it. Harry staggered once. Venom. Magic in it too. Nasty. Fast. Tom stared at the corpse, then at Harry, and for the first time all chapter he looked his age. Impossible, his face said. Harry spat blood onto the floor and advanced with the fang in his hand. Tom backed up. "No," he said, recovering a second later into fury. "No, you don't get to do this by brute force like some stupid." Harry drove the fang into the diary. Ink exploded out of it like black blood. Tom screamed, not theatrically, not with style, like something was being dragged through barbed wire inside his soul. The diary bucked under Harry's hand. Harry pinned it harder. Tom stumbled backward, body flickering. "You idiot," he gasped. "Do you understand what you are? What's coming for you?" Harry leaned in close enough that Tom could see there was no fear anywhere in him. "Better question," Harry said. "Do you?" He shoved the fang deeper. The diary split. Tom Riddle came apart in strips of smoke and torn light, face twisting from fury into nothing. Then he was gone. The chamber sagged into silence. Harry looked down at the wound in his side. Venom was spreading dark under the skin, not enough to drop him instantly, enough to matter. Fawkes landed beside him and cried softly. Harry dropped to one knee next to Ginny. "Hey," her eyelids fluttered. "Come on, nothing." Fawkes lowered his head and wept onto Harry's side. The tears hit like liquid fire and then cooling steel. Venom hissed. The wound closed in flashes, not perfectly but enough. Harry sucked in a breath and rolled his shoulder. "Useful bird," he muttered. Fawkes made a noise that sounded almost smug. Harry gathered Ginny into his arms. The way out took less time. The tunnel shattered where he needed it shattered. Stones moved when he put his hands on them and told them, through pressure if not magic, that they were no longer in charge. He came out of Myrtle's bathroom with Ginny in his arms, covered in blood that was not entirely his, just as McGonagall, Snape, Ron, Hermione, and a ghastly white Lockhart arrived in a wave of noise. Ron saw Ginny and stopped breathing for one terrible second. Then she coughed. He made a sound Harry would remember for a long time. McGonagall ran forward. Snape did too, though he hid it better. Hermione had one hand over her mouth, eyes huge and shining. Behind them, Dumbledore stepped into view as if the castle itself had decided he was back where he belonged. His eyes went over Harry, the blood, the dead basilisk slime on the torn robes, the black fang in Harry's hand. Then to Ginny, awake enough now to cling weakly to her brother. The corner of Dumbledore's mouth twitched. "Good evening," he said. Harry looked at him. "You're late again." This time McGonagall actually closed her eyes in pain. Dumbledore, to his credit, bowed his head a fraction. "So I am more actions." Harry looked at the adults crowding the doorway, then at the blood on his sleeves, then at the giant pipe yawning open behind the sinks. "There's a dead basilisk under your school," he said. "You might want to do something about that." For one heartbeat nobody answered. Then Myrtle floated up through a cracked toilet and shrieked, "I knew it! I said there was something dreadful down there and no one ever listens to Myrtle." Ron pushed past everyone and got to Ginny first. He dropped to his knees so hard the tiles cracked under them and caught his sister's face in both hands. "Gin," he said, voice wrecked. "Ginny, hey, look at me." Her eyes fluttered open again. She focused on him slowly like she'd swum up from very far down. "Ron," that one word finished him. He laughed and choked on it at the same time. Behind him, Hermione let out a long, shaking breath and pressed one hand over her mouth. McGonagall came forward next, all iron control and sharp eyes, but when she saw Ginny breathing and Harry still upright, some terrible tension left her shoulders. Then she looked properly at Harry, not just the blood, the rip in his robes where the fang had gone in. The dark scales smeared over his sleeves. The blackened basilisk fang still clenched in one hand. "You fought it alone," she said. Harry glanced at the fang as if he'd forgotten he was still holding it. There wasn't much cue. Snape made a soft, disbelieving sound that could have meant anything. Lockhart, who had spent the last 30 seconds trying to edge quietly toward the corridor, chose that moment to squeak. Well then, if the immediate danger has passed, I feel my role here has probably concluded. Stay where you are, McGonagall said without turning. He froze. Dumbledore's gaze rested on Harry a moment longer. There was relief there, but there was something else too. Calculation, perhaps, or recognition. Not of what Harry had done, of what doing it meant. Fawkes fluttered down and landed lightly on Harry's shoulder. Ron looked up at that, then at the blood, then at Harry. You killed it, Harry shrugged. It kept trying to eat me. That, Hermione said weakly, is not actually the important part of that sentence. It is to me. Ginny stirred again, saw Harry over Ron's shoulder and went stark white. No, she whispered. No, the diary. Harry held up the broken remains of the black cover. It dripped foul ink onto the floor. Gone. She stared at it, then at him, and her whole face crumpled with such sudden misery that even Snape looked away. I didn't mean, she started, voice cracking. I didn't know what it was. He talked to me and I thought. Ron wrapped his arms around her before the rest came apart. Dumbledore moved then, quick and quiet. He knelt beside them, and for all the rumors and plans and secrets wrapped around him, his voice when he spoke to Ginny was simply kind. You are safe now. She shook her head against Ron's shoulder. No, I'm not. I wrote in it, I told it things, and then I couldn't remember and people got hurt, and Harry, look at me, Harry said. She did. His face was streaked with basilisk blood and dirt. His glasses were crooked. There was a split in his lower lip and a bruise already darkening along his jaw where the serpent had clipped him. He looked like he had just crawled out of a war, because he had, and still his voice was steady. You were used, he said. That's different. Ginny's breath hitched. He picked you because you were alone with it, Harry went on. Because you trusted a book that answered back. That's on him, not you. She stared at him like she didn't quite know what to do with being forgiven that quickly. Dumbledore watched the exchange in silence, and Harry felt the old man notice it all, the speed of the reassurance, the certainty in it, the absolute lack of hesitation. McGonagall straightened abruptly and snapped into motion. Miss Weasley to the hospital wing. Mr. Weasley with her, Miss Granger as well. Professor Snape, I suggest we seal this entrance immediately. Snape's gaze flicked to the sink, then to Harry, then back again. With what precisely? Harry pointed with the fang. Stone slab in the third branch tunnel about 30 feet down. If you shift it sideways, it'll jam the slide, not permanent, but enough. 3 sets of adult eyes turned to him. Harry blinked. What? I noticed. Lockhart made another faint sound of distress. Dumbledore rose. Professor Snape, Professor McGonagall, please escort Miss Weasley. I would like a word with Mr. Potter. Ron looked instantly mutinous. I'm not leaving him. Harry glanced at Ginny, who was clinging to Ron like the floor might open again. Go with your sister. Ron hesitated. Then he nodded once. Don't die in a conversation. I'll try. Hermione touched Harry's arm on the way past. You'd better explain all of this properly. Eventually. That means now. Then eventually now. She gave him one of her sharp, furious looks that somehow managed to carry worry inside it, then followed McGonagall out. Snape herded Lockhart after them with visible disgust. When the bathroom had emptied, the silence changed. Less frantic. Heavier. Dumbledore repaired one cracked sink with a flick of his wand and leaned against it as if this were any other conversation taking place in any other school. Harry stayed where he was. Fawkes left his shoulder and circled once, a wash of gold red against the damp light. You're hurt, Dumbledore said. Not much. That is a lie. Harry looked down at the torn side of his robes. The wound had knitted over under Phoenix tears, but the skin still throbbed. Less than before. Dumbledore accepted that. Tom Riddle spoke to you. Harry's eyes narrowed. You know what he was? Yes. A memory, more than memory, less than a man. Dumbledore's mouth tightened. Tom always had a gift for leaving sharp pieces of himself where they might be useful later. Harry rolled the broken diary cover between his fingers. He knew about me. Dumbledore's gaze sharpened. What exactly did he say? Harry told him. Not all of it at first. Not the parts about rule and lesser people and born to be more. Those were boring. Men like Tom always thought ambition sounded profound if they put enough silk around it. But he repeated the parts about the school fearing him in the outline of an heir. The parts about sealed records, hidden blood being defined before he could define himself. He repeated the line about Dumbledore telling him just enough to keep him tame. That one hung in the room. Dumbledore did not flinch. Tom's talent for finding nerves remains intact. Is he wrong? The question came out flat, direct, impossible to dodge. Dumbledore looked older for one brief second, the way he sometimes did when no audience was present. Not entirely, he said. Harry laughed once, tired and sharp. That's becoming a habit with you. Regrettably. What was the diary really? Dumbledore folded his hands into his sleeves. An anchor, a receptacle for memory, intent, identity, dark magic of a particularly intimate sort. You don't want to name it. Not today. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Fine, was Lucius Malfoy meant to know? Number, you sound sure. I know Lucius, Dumbledore said. He is ambitious, prejudiced, and vain. He enjoys pulling at structures from behind velvet curtains, but he also likes surviving. Handing a self-aware fragment of Lord Voldemort to a schoolgirl is not strategy. It is arrogance colliding with ignorance. Harry leaned back against the sink opposite him. He wanted panic. Yes. He wanted you pushed out. Yes. He knew people would suspect me. Dumbledore's eyes stayed on his. I believe he hoped so. That sat cleanly with everything Harry had felt all year. Lucius's hand on Ginny's books. The smooth concern. The pleasure in chaos so long as it stayed abstract. Harry's fingers tightened around the ruined diary until the leather creaked. Dumbledore noticed. You are considering whether to throw him through a wall. I'm considering several walls. Try not to do it in front of too many witnesses. Harry snorted despite himself. Fawkes landed on the sink between them and folded his wings. The phoenix cocked his head, bright eyes moving from one to the other as though enjoying the balance of the room. Dumbledore glanced at the bird and then back to Harry. There is something else. Isn't there always? Yes. A pause, the basilisk's voice. When you heard it, did it feel familiar? Harry frowned. That was not the question he expected. He looked past Dumbledore at the cracked tile wall and replayed it. The hiss in the pipes, the drag of scales, the hunger. The weird ease with which meaning arrived before words did. No, he said slowly, not familiar, easy. Dumbledore nodded once, and that was somehow more unsettling than surprise would have been. Why? Because I had wondered whether the connection ran deeper than language. Harry's stare sharpened. Deeper how? Dumbledore hesitated. Harry barked a short laugh. There you are again. Harry, number say it. Dumbledore was silent just long enough to make the answer matter. Tom Riddle opened the chamber because he was the heir of Slytherin, he said. He could speak the language, command the serpent, direct the fear, that much is clear. He looked at Harry very steadily. What is less clear is why the basilisk obeyed you once its master lost control. Harry thought of the fight, of the blind fury, of the thing trying to crush him around the middle while he tore its jaw apart. It didn't obey me. No. Number, Harry met his gaze. It tried to kill me, I was just stronger. Dumbledore's expression did something odd then, not quite a smile, something like reluctant appreciation mixed with concern. That, he said softly, is also an answer. Madame Pomfrey burst in before either of them could keep digging, took one look at Harry and launched into such professional outrage that even Dumbledore backed out of the way with visible wisdom. She marched Harry to the hospital wing, stripped the ruined robes off his side despite his protests, and muttered darkly over the half-healed bite. A basilisk fang, she said, as if testing whether the sentence offended reality. A basilisk, at 12. Almost 12. That, she snapped, is not comforting. The hospital wing already held Ron, Hermione, and Ginny behind white curtains. McGonagall stood near the end of one bed speaking in low tones to Arthur Weasley, whose face had gone a dangerous shade of pale. Molly sat beside Ginny with one hand in her daughter's hair and a look in her eyes that made Harry think of wild animals and fire at the same time. When she saw him, she stood up fast enough to knock over her chair. Before Harry could brace for the obvious, she crossed the room and threw both arms around him. It caught him so off guard he just stood there. Molly held on hard. "Thank you," she said into his shoulder, and her voice was shaking. "Thank you." Harry's hands hovered awkwardly in the air for 1 second before he put them lightly against her back. "She's all right. She is because of you." Ron, sitting on the next bed with his arm around Ginny, gave Harry a look full of too many things to sort through quickly. Gratitude, shock, brotherly loyalty, and the faint stunned disbelief of someone whose best friend had gone into a hidden death chamber and come back with the problem solved. "Mate," he said hoarsely, "did you rip its mouth open?" Hermione turned from where she'd been talking to McGonagall. "Ron." "What?" He obviously did. Harry sat on the edge of the empty bed nearest them while Pomfrey fussed with potions. "It seemed quickest." Ginny stared at him. "You're insane." He looked back at her. "Probably." To his surprise, that got a weak laugh out of her. Arthur stepped closer, hands in his pockets, because if he took them out he might start pacing. "Harry," he said, and the usual warmth in his voice had gone rough around the edges, "I know I've said thank you before. I'm going to say it again anyway." Harry looked at the Weasleys gathered around Ginny's bed and shrugged one shoulder. "You'd have done the same." Arthur met his eyes for one long second and seemed to understand that Harry meant exactly what he said. Not politeness, fact. "Yes," Arthur said quietly, "I would have tried." That landed more honestly than praise. The rest of the night blurred. Students flooded the corridors the moment word got out. Some of them snuck to the hospital wing under weak excuses. Others simply stared when Harry passed. The story outran itself in an hour. By midnight half the school knew there had been a basilisk. By 1 in the morning the details had become nonsense. Harry had strangled it with his bare hands. Harry had snapped its neck. Harry had flown through the chamber roof and punched it to death in midair. Fred and George cornered him after lights out and demanded clarification on which parts were true. "Very little," Hermione said, arms crossed. Harry considered. "The neck thing nearly happened." George looked delighted. "Fantastic." Fred slapped a hand over his heart. "That's our seeker." "Don't encourage him," Hermione snapped. "Too late," Harry and both twins said at once. Morning made things stranger. Dumbledore was reinstated before breakfast. The governors, once informed one of their children had nearly died, because Lucius Malfoy had slipped a cursed object into a first-year's cauldron of books, folded very quickly. Lucius himself did not come to the castle immediately, which Harry took as evidence of some survival instinct after all. The first real apology reached him outside the Great Hall. Ernie Macmillan marched over flanked by 2 Hufflepuffs and visibly forced himself not to lose his nerve. Justin Finch-Fletchley hovered 3 steps back with ears red enough to light. Ernie stopped in front of Harry and stuck out his hand. "I was wrong." Harry looked at the hand, then at Ernie's face. "About," Ernie swallowed. "About you." Justin exhaled through his nose. "Subtle, Ernie. I'm trying." Harry let the pause stretch just enough to be uncomfortable. Then he shook Ernie's hand. "All right," Ernie blinked. "That's it. What were you expecting, a speech?" Justin laughed helplessly. Some of the fear dropped out of his face with it. "I'm sorry too," he said. "I thought, well, you know what I thought." Harry nodded. "Yes," Justin winced. "Right." Hermione, standing nearby with a stack of books against her chest, watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. "People do love arriving late to obvious conclusions," Ron snorted. "Understatement of the year." The apology line would have become absurd if Harry had let it. He didn't. After the 4th uncomfortable admission and 2 separate attempts by younger students to ask if basilisk scales could be used in potion work, he got bored and went to settle the matter more efficiently. The entrance hall was packed between classes when the doors from the lower corridor slammed open. Students turned. Harry stepped through, dragging the basilisk skull behind him by one broken fang. The thing was massive. Stone scraped and echoed under its weight. Its jaws were stretched wide, one eye socket smashed, scales dulled now but still huge and ugly and very real. The hall went silent so fast it felt like a spell. Harry hauled the skull another 10 feet and let it drop in the center of the floor with a thunderous crack. Dust puffed up around it. He looked at the crowd. "For anyone still confused," he said, "this was the monster." Nobody said a word. A third-year Ravenclaw dropped his books. Draco Malfoy, halfway down the stairs with Crabbe and Goyle behind him, stopped dead and lost all color for a second before rage rushed in to cover it. Hermione pinched the bridge of her nose. That is one way to do it. Ron was openly grinning. It's a good way. Professor McGonagall appeared from a side corridor just in time to see two terrified second-years ducking around a basilisk skull larger than a carriage. Her expression went absolutely blank. "Mr. Potter," she said after a beat, "why is that in my entrance hall?" Harry looked at the skull, then at her. "Evidence." A muscle twitched in her cheek. "Take it out." "Where?" McGonagall glanced at the crowd still staring from every staircase and doorway in the hall. Their fear had shifted again. It wasn't gone. It would never be gone entirely, not after a year like this. But now it had an object, a corpse, something with fangs and bone and proof. When she looked back at Harry, she knew it too. The hall had needed this, even if she would die before admitting he'd been right about the method. "Somewhere," she said tightly, "that is not under my feet." Harry hooked the fang again and kept walking. Students flattened themselves to the walls to let him pass. By lunch, the chamber story had become fact instead of rumor. By dinner, even the Slytherins had stopped trying to imply Harry might secretly have enjoyed the whole thing. Pansy Parkinson still whispered once when he passed. Harry looked at her once, and she found somewhere else to be. Only Draco held. He caught Harry outside the dungeons after potions, standing with that careful posture aristocratic boys wore when they were trying to imitate the grown men who ruined them. "You think this changes anything?" Draco asked. Harry adjusted the strap on his bag. "You'll need to narrow that down." Draco's pale face tightened. "You showing off a dead monster doesn't make people forget what you are." Harry stopped. Snape had just disappeared around the corner ahead. The corridor was emptying, stone walls, torches, no audience that mattered. Harry stepped closer. Draco's chin lifted because he couldn't stop himself. "What do you think I am?" Harry asked quietly. Draco's mouth opened. Nothing came out. That was answer enough too. Harry's gaze stayed on him. "That's the problem with boys like you. You inherit words before you understand them. Creature, blood, fit to rule, fit to obey." His mouth twitched without humor. "Then one day you say them to someone stronger than you and realize they were never armor, just noise." Draco's hands curled at his sides. "My father. Your father slipped a cursed diary to an 11-year-old girl." Draco's eyes flashed. "You don't know that," Harry smiled. "I saw him." For the first time, genuine uncertainty cracked through Draco's expression. Harry leaned in slightly. "Tell him I'm looking forward to the conversation." Then he walked away. He got it sooner than expected. Lucius Malfoy arrived 3 days before term ended, summoned to Dumbledore's office under circumstances Harry found deeply satisfactory. Dumbledore did not ask Harry to stay out of it. That, more than anything, suggested the old man was learning. The office felt smaller with Lucius inside it, not because Malfoy was powerful in the way Harry understood power, because he filled space with polish and contempt and the assumption that rooms should arrange themselves around his preferences. Dobby stood at the edge of the room holding a tray with shaking hands. Lucius's eyes found Harry first. A tiny pause, then the smooth smile. "Mr. Potter." "Lucius." Dumbledore sat behind the desk, fingers steepled. Fawkes watched from his perch. McGonagall stood near the shelves like black carved judgment. "No titles." Lucius said lightly. "How informal." Harry folded his arms. "You don't feel like a Mr. Malfoy kind of person today." Lucius's gaze cooled by 1 degree. "I hear you've been very dramatic this week." "I killed your basilisk." Lucius's eyelid twitched. "It was never mine." "No," Harry tipped his head. "Funny, your house elf seemed worried." Dobby nearly dropped the tray. Lucius did not look at him, which was interesting by itself. Dumbledore intervened before the room could get more entertaining. "Mr. Malfoy, several governors have expressed concern regarding the circumstances under which Miss Weasley came into possession of Tom Riddle's diary." Lucius rested both hands on the head of his cane. "Children misplace things, exchange things, steal things. I fail to see how a schoolgirl's untidy habits have become my problem." Harry laughed. Lucius's eyes cut to him. "I saw you drop it into her books," Harry said. The smile returned, thinner than before. "Did you?" "Yes. And yet you said nothing." Harry met his gaze. "I do now." Lucius looked almost amused. "A convenient memory." "Not memory." Harry stepped away from the wall. Pattern. You wanted Dumbledore weakened. You wanted the school afraid. You wanted people looking at me instead of at you. It was clever right up until the giant snake died. McGonagall's mouth went thin, trying not to react to that phrasing. Lucius's knuckles whitened briefly on the cane. You overestimate yourself, boy. No, Harry said. You did. That struck harder than shouting would have. Dumbledore watched them like a man watching blades test one another's edges. Lucius turned to him with silken disdain. And this is your governance now. Interrogations based on the fantasies of a child who talks to serpents. Careful, Harry said. Lucius looked back. The room sharpened. Harry dropped his arms and took one step forward. I'm getting very tired, he said, of men who mistake being rich for being untouchable. Dobby made a tiny squeak. McGonagall took a breath as if preparing to stop a duel. Dumbledore did not move. Lucius's face lost its last pretense of warmth. You are not yet old enough to understand the people you are speaking to. Harry smiled. It was not nice, and you're not as dangerous as you think. For one reckless second, Lucius's hand twitched toward his wand. Harry was on him before the motion finished. He crossed the office in a blur, caught the wrist halfway to the robes, and drove Lucius back into the bookshelf hard enough to rattle every silver instrument in the room. The cane clattered away. Lucius hissed in real pain and shock. Dobby yelped. McGonagall stepped forward. Potter. Harry did not look away from Lucius. Try it. Lucius stared at the fingers locked around his wrist. He couldn't move it, couldn't even pretend he could. All the polished certainty in his face had gone brittle. You threaten children, Harry said softly. You hide behind objects and gossip and other people's fear. Then you come into this school and posture like a lord. He tightened his grip just enough to make Lucius's breath catch. Do better. Lucius's free hand twitched again. Harry let go only to snap the cane in half across one knee and drop the pieces at his feet. The silence that followed was almost reverent. Then Dobby, eyes shining with a wild emotion Harry had only seen once before, darted forward to collect the broken pieces and the wrapped remains of the ruined diary that had slid from Lucius's cloak in the scuffle. Harry bent, picked up the ragged bundle, and noticed one of his own spare socks stuck in the folds from where it had been used to wrap the slime-stained cover. He smiled faintly and tossed the bundle back. Lucius caught it automatically. The sock flopped free into Dobby's hands. The house elf stared at it, then at Lucius, then at the sock again. A beat later, understanding struck like sunrise. Master has given Dobby a sock, he whispered. Lucius went very still. Number, Master gave it to Dobby. I did no such. Dobby's whole body lit with joy so fierce it looked painful. Dobby is free. The air in the office changed. Something old and binding broke like a chain underwater. Dobby laughed, once. Then again louder, almost disbelieving. Harry had never seen freedom happen before. It looked good on people. Lucius looked ready to spit venom. Dobby turned toward him, and for the first time there was no cowering anywhere in the elf's posture at all. Dobby will not miss you. McGonagall actually coughed to hide a sound that might have been a laugh. Lucius's face had gone bloodless with fury. He straightened his robes with rigid, murderous dignity and aimed a look at Harry that would have curdled water. This is not finished. Harry stepped right into it. Then next time bring better ideas. Lucius swept out of the office without another word. The door slammed hard enough to shake the portraits. For a moment no one moved. Then Dobby turned to Harry, clutching the sock to his chest like it was made of stars. Harry Potter freed Dobby, Harry shrugged. You looked like you needed a win. Dobby made a strange choking noise and threw his arms around Harry's middle before anyone could warn him about boundaries. Harry froze. Then, because apparently this was his week for it, he awkwardly patted the elf's back. You're welcome. Dobby looked up, tears in both eyes and grin huge and sharp and entirely his own. If Harry Potter ever needs Dobby, I know where to yell. That seemed to satisfy him. When the office finally cleared, Dumbledore asked Harry to stay behind. The evening sun cut long gold through the windows. Dust moved in it. Fawkes dozed with his head tucked under one wing. The castle beyond the glass looked peaceful in that irritating way places often did after trying to kill people. Dumbledore stood at the window. You could have broken Lucius's arm. Harry leaned against a cabinet. I didn't. Number, you're welcome. Dumbledore's shoulders moved once in what might have been silent laughter. Thank you, Harry watched him. You really are getting used to me. I am trying. There it was again, not perfection, effort. Harry let it stand. After a while Dumbledore said, Tom Riddle offered you power, I assume. Harry snorted. He offered me a speech. And did any part of it tempt you? The question might have insulted him if it came from anyone else. Instead, Harry thought about the chamber, about Tom's smiling certainty, about all year, all those looks, all those whispers, about the ministry file that used the word contained like it was practical instead of ugly. Yes, he said. Dumbledore turned. Harry's expression did not waver. Not him, the idea of not asking permission from frightened people anymore. Dumbledore nodded slowly. That temptation I understand. Do you? Yes. The old man's blue eyes sharpened with memory. More than I would like. Harry considered that. There was history there too, enough to fill a war probably. What stopped you? He asked. Dumbledore was quiet a moment. Then, the damage power does when it begins by deciding other people are safer without choices. Harry let that settle. He thought of Vernon, Petunia, Lucius, Tom, ministry files and soft-voiced lies. He thought of James Potter loving him without sharing his blood, Lily deciding for reasons that might have been wise and still hurt, Nalin as a name moving closer in the dark every time someone said it. Choices mattered. Who got to keep them mattered more. When he finally pushed off the cabinet, his voice was level. If anyone tries to own me, he said, they're going to regret it. Dumbledore did not smile. I know, he said. The train ride home should have felt lighter. The chamber was shut. Ginny was recovering. The school had stopped treating Harry like a possible murder weapon and shifted back to treating him like a less classifiable problem, which was progress of a kind. Ron spent half the trip reenacting the basilisk fight with increasing inaccuracies and one licorice wand as the serpent. Hermione corrected him every 30 seconds until even she started laughing. Ginny sat across from Harry with her knees tucked up and watched him sometimes when she thought he wouldn't notice. He always noticed. Near dusk, when Ron and Hermione were both distracted arguing over whether basilisks technically counted as draconic adjacent for classification purposes, Ginny leaned forward and said quietly, "Did he get in your head too?" Harry looked at her. She twirled a strand of red hair around one finger and stared out the window instead of at him. Tom, the diary, he knew things that hurt. He knew what to say to make you feel smaller. I was just wondering. Harry rested his forearms on his knees. Not like that, he said. She glanced back. But I know the trick. Ginny nodded once. She seemed to understand the difference at once, which Harry liked. After a moment she said, "Thank you for not looking at me like I was stupid." Harry shrugged. "You were lonely, different problem." Her mouth curved a little. "You always talk like that." "Like what?" "Like you've already decided where the blame goes." He thought about it. "Usually, that must be nice. It saves time." Ginny laughed under her breath. It sounded more like herself than anything he'd heard from her all year. When the train slowed into King's Cross, Harry felt it before he saw anything, a pressure, not magic. Not the warm hum of spells in the barrier. Not the familiar crackle of witches and wizards pressing toward family and trunks and ordinary life. Something else. He stopped on the platform with his trunk in one hand and looked up through the smoke and station rafters toward a patch of evening sky gone deep blue beyond the glass. For one instant he thought he saw a figure there, far too high, human-shaped, motionless in the open air, broad shoulders, dark against the light. Then a train whistle blew, people moved, and the shape was gone. "Harry," Hermione said. He kept looking another second. "Nothing," he said at last. But as the crowd carried them forward into summer, he could still feel it under his skin, the sense of being measured from very far away, not by a teacher, not by the ministry, by blood. Chapter 3, Blood in the Sky. Aunt Marge had been in the house for 19 minutes before Harry decided he was done with her. It was a private record. Vernon had lasted 12. Petunia, somehow, was still holding on, though only because she had spent years training herself to smile through poison if the curtains were clean and the neighbors might hear. Marge sat at the Dursleys' dining table in tweed and perfume and certainty, drinking brandy like the glass had personally earned the honor. Ripper's lead was looped around one thick wrist. The bulldog wheezed at Harry's shoes whenever he moved. Harry had taken the far chair on purpose. He wasn't hiding. He just preferred seeing everyone at once. Marge carved through the roast and kept talking like she'd never once heard a thought worth waiting for. "Bad breeding always tells in the end," she said, sawing at the meat. "Can train dogs for years, but if there's rot in the line, out it comes." Vernon made the laugh he used when he wanted her to keep liking him. "Quite right." Petunia passed the potatoes too quickly and nearly dropped the spoon. Harry took some anyway. Marge sipped her brandy and looked at him over the rim of the glass. "Still got that stare, has he?" "He's quiet," Petunia said tightly. "He's rude," Marge corrected. "Difference." Harry buttered his potato. "You always this charming, or is it a special occasion?" Petunia shut her eyes. Vernon's fork hit the plate. "Boy," Marge barked a laugh. "There it is. Knew he had a mouth on him. I said to Vernon years ago, didn't I? Too much of the wrong sort in that one. Parents like his." Harry looked up. Marge smiled the mean little smile of someone who liked hitting where she thought the target couldn't hit back. "Drunkards, wasn't it?" she said. "Ran themselves off the road, did they? Not surprising. Weak stock, bad habits." The table split down the middle. It didn't explode, it just gave up. The oak cracked under Harry's hands with a hard, tearing sound. Plates jumped. Glass tipped. Gravy sloshed across Vernon's lap. Ripper barked himself into a frenzy. Marge jerked back in her chair, eyes wide. Harry stood. His voice was calm enough to make the room feel colder. "Say one more thing about them." Marge, to her credit or stupidity, tried. "I'll say what her wineglass lifted off the table. Petunia screamed. The bottle followed, then the silverware, then the whole fruit bowl. They rose around Marge's head in a slow orbit, spinning through the dining room air while Vernon made wet, strangled noises and backed toward the wall. Harry hadn't taken his eyes off her. "I said," he repeated, "say one more thing." Marge's face went from red to pale to something almost thoughtful as she realized, all at once, that the room no longer belonged to her. Then the chair legs left the carpet. She floated 6 inches upward and clutched the arms with both hands. Vernon made for Harry in a burst of panic and fury. Harry turned his head. That was enough. Vernon stopped like he had run into glass. The floating silverware rattled harder around Marge's face. Her cheeks puffed. Her jacket buttons strained. "Harry," Petunia whispered, horrified, "stop this." Harry looked at her. The pressure in the room wavered. The wineglass shattered in midair. Red drops hung glittering for one impossible second and then splashed across the wallpaper. Marge shot upward 3 more feet and screamed. Harry exhaled through his nose. "Worth it," he said, picked up his school trunk from beside the hall door and walked out. He heard Vernon shouting behind him, heard Petunia shrieking for a rope, heard Marge continue to ascend into the dining room chandelier. He did not go back. The night air on Privet Drive felt good after the house. Harry walked to the end of the street with his trunk bumping lightly behind him, Hedwig's cage in one hand, and no clear plan beyond not spending another minute under the Dursleys' roof. The sky above Surrey was dark and low and familiar. He looked up anyway. That pressure had come back more often since the end of term, a sense every now and then that something far above the clouds had paused to look down. Not a spell, not a person with binoculars, something bigger, colder. He didn't see anything tonight, just stars trying to break through the haze. News from nearby houses drifted through open windows as he passed. Television voices, laughter, the thud of doors. A clipped newsreader saying the name Sirius Black in the same grim tone she might have used for a train derailment or war. Harry slowed. The escaped convict had been on every channel for a week. Grainy photograph, hollow face, warning to stay indoors. Vernon had used him as an excuse to lock everything twice. Harry had looked at the picture and felt one thing only: curiosity. Black was meant to be dangerous enough for Muggle police and the Ministry both. Dangerous enough that Fudge himself had visited the leaky cauldron to talk to Tom in low, worried tones, if Ron's last letter was anything to go by. Dangerous enough, apparently, that everyone expected Harry to be concerned. He was. If Sirius Black wanted him, he could come ask. A triple-decker bus slammed out of empty air so close to him, Hedwig battered the inside of her cage in outrage. Harry didn't flinch. The night bus leaned at a crooked angle, purple paint shining under the street lamps. A pimply young conductor in a maroon uniform tumbled out and stared at Harry, then at the trunk, then back at Harry. "Blimey," he said, "you didn't even scream." "Should I have?" The conductor squinted. "Most people do, sometimes before we arrive." Harry shifted Hedwig's cage. "You driving or are we flirting?" That got a grin. "Stan Shunpike, welcome to the night bus, emergency transport for the stranded witch or wizard. Step aboard." The leaky cauldron was awake when they arrived. Fudge was there exactly as Ron had heard, green bowler hat in hand, trying to look less alarmed than he felt. Tom wiped glasses behind the bar with one eye on the minister and both ears on the room. Harry stepped through the door carrying his trunk one-handed and conversation stumbled. Tom blinked. "Harry?" Fudge whirled. For a second his face did something odd, alarm first, then relief, then the complicated smile of a politician whose evening has just become much less convenient. "Harry, my dear boy," Fudge said, striding over with both hands out. "Excellent, excellent." Harry looked at the hands. Fudge lowered them. "I accidentally floated my aunt," Harry said. "Thought I should get ahead of the paperwork." Tom choked on a laugh and turned it into a cough. Fudge waved one plump hand. "No harm done, no harm done." Harry raised an eyebrow. "That's generous." Fudge's smile tightened. "Circumstances are somewhat unusual at present." "You mean Black?" Fudge's eyes sharpened just for a moment. "Yes. You think he's after me?" The minister's pause answered more clearly than his words. "We're taking every precaution," he said. "You'll stay here the remainder of the summer on the house. No wandering off, if you please." Harry leaned one shoulder against the reception desk. "Why would he come after me?" Fudge adjusted his hat. "Old grudges, confused mind." "Black was close to your parents before he turned on them." "Turned how?" Tom stopped polishing the same glass. Fudge took a breath and gave Harry the official version with all the careful edges of someone repeating a line already approved in committee. Sirius Black was a friend of James and Lily Potter. They trusted him. During the war, when you know who was hunting them, Black betrayed their hiding place. Your parents died. He murdered 13 people when confronted and escaped capture for years by hiding in Azkaban's silence. He tried for sympathy. "I'm sorry, Harry. I would have preferred you heard it differently." Harry let the words settle. Friend, betrayal, Azkaban, 13 dead. It was a neat story. He didn't like neat stories. "Why didn't Dumbledore tell me?" Fudge's eyes flicked away. "Albus has his own views on timing." Harry smiled faintly. "So does everyone, apparently." Fudge pretended not to hear that. "The point is, Black is unstable, highly dangerous, and aware of your significance." "I'm aware of it too." "Yes, well." Fudge clasped his hands over his stomach. "Awareness is good, caution is better." Harry's gaze moved past him to the rain-dark window. "You think caution wins?" "Against men like Black, often." Harry looked back. "That hasn't been my experience." Tom made another suspicious coughing noise into the glass. Fudge changed tack. "You'll have ministry protection on the train." "I don't need, you'll have it." There it was, under the softness. State authority in velvet gloves. Harry held his gaze long enough to let him know he'd seen it. Then he picked up his trunk again. "Fine." That night in a small room under the leaky cauldron's slanted roof, Harry lay awake and watched the window. Sometime after midnight the clouds parted. A shape crossed the stars. Not a bird, too fast. Not a broom, too high. Human. It moved silently from one horizon to the other and vanished. Harry sat up in bed. By the time he got the window open, there was nothing there but cold air and a hard pulse under his skin that would not settle. He smiled into the dark. "About time," he murmured. King's Cross was ringed with tension by the 1st of September. Not obvious tension. The kind official people wore when trying to make fear look procedural. Guards that weren't quite police. Wizards in muggle coats pretending not to scan the crowd. Parents keeping children close while speaking too loudly about weather and school books. Ron and Hermione found Harry near the barrier in the middle of an argument over whether the Daily Prophet was deliberately making Black look taller. "It's the angle," Hermione said. "It's propaganda," Ron said. "You don't even know what propaganda means." "It means lying with layout." Hermione opened her mouth, then looked offended to discover that was not completely wrong. Harry grinned. "Good summer." Ron stared at him, then grabbed him in a rough one-armed hug that nearly took both of them into a luggage trolley. "You vanished after that basilisk thing. You were there for the important part." Hermione didn't bother with a hug. She stepped in front of him, looked him up and down like she was checking for missing pieces, then nodded once. "You look rested. Was that a concern? With you, always." They passed through the barrier together and found the Hogwarts Express under steam and shouting. Arthur and Molly stood with Ginny and the twins near the middle carriages. Their faces were warm until Arthur noticed the line of dark-cloaked figures at the far end of the platform. Expression hardened at once. "Dementors," he said quietly when Harry followed his gaze. The word moved through the group like a draft. Harry looked at the shapes, tall, hooded, motionless in a way nothing living should be. "They're guards?" he asked. Arthur's mouth tightened. "Ministry's idea." Ron muttered something impolite about the ministry. Molly crossed herself in the old magical way and turned on Harry before he could say anything else. "You are staying with your friends on the train." "I was going to anyway." "No wandering, still not 8. Harry," he almost smiled, "fine." The compartment they found was half full by the time the train pulled out. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny for the first leg because she claimed not to want to deal with first-year chatter yet, and Neville Longbottom carrying a toad with the concentration of a man guarding a state secret. A tired-looking man in shabby robes slept by the window in the corner, arms folded, head tilted against the glass. Ron lowered his voice. "Who's that?" Hermione read the name on the inside of the battered suitcase at his feet. "Professor R.J. Lupin. Looks like he's had a rough holiday," Ginny said. Harry watched the man for a second. Scarred hands, worn coat, sleep too deep to be healthy, or a rough life. Rain chased them north. The conversations in the compartment came and went easily. Hermione had done all the assigned reading and some that wasn't assigned. Ron had spent half August denoming and considered this a political grievance. Ginny said little at first, but every now and then Harry caught her looking at him with the lingering uncertainty of someone who still remembered waking up in the chamber and finding him alive. He let her have time. By late afternoon, the train slowed unexpectedly. Rain ran harder down the windows, then even that sound changed. Cold seeped in under the door, not ordinary cold. This had intent in it. The lights flickered once and died. Neville's toad gave a tiny croak and tried to bury itself in his sleeve. Hermione was halfway to her wand when the compartment door slid open and one of the dark figures from the platform filled it. Every breath in the carriage stopped. The thing's hood turned. Harry didn't feel fear first. He felt theft. Warmth pulled out of the room. Noise stripped bare. The memory of laughter, sunlight, broom handles under his palms, the smell of treacle tart in the Gryffindor common room, gone in one sick drag as though none of it had ever belonged to anyone. Ron folded in on himself with a strangled sound. Ginny clutched the seat until her knuckles shone white. Hermione's hand shook around her wand. The Dementor glided forward. Then James Potter was screaming. Not in the room, not in the present. Inside Harry's head with horrible, perfect clarity, one raw burst of fury and warning cut off too fast. Lily's voice right after, desperate and fierce and breaking. Harry surged to his feet with the kind of anger that burned clean. Number, the Dementor drifted closer, rotting hand lifting. Harry crossed the compartment in 2 strides and hit it. His fist went through black cloth and found something colder than winter and emptier than a grave. The impact threw the creature sideways into the corridor wall hard enough to buckle the paneling. Frost burst over the glass. Neville screamed. The Dementor made a sound like sucking breath through a crypt. It came off the wall untouched. Harry's jaw set. "Oh, fine." The thing turned back toward him and the room sank colder still. This time even anger had to fight through the flood of old loss pouring out of it. The train, the house in Godric's Hollow, his mother on the stairs and a red flash through the dark. Then a voice cut through it. "Expecto Patronum," silver erupted across the compartment. A wolf made of moonlight and steel launched past Harry's shoulder and hit the Dementor square in the chest. The creature reeled, hood snapping back with a glimpse of something raw and dead underneath, then fled through the door in a rush of darkness. The cold broke. Sound rushed back all at once, panting, the rattle of glass, Ron swearing weakly at nobody in particular. Professor Lupin stood in the corridor with his wand still raised, face pale and eyes suddenly very awake. For a second he looked at Harry, then at the dent in the panel where the dementor had hit, and something very alert slid behind his exhaustion. "Anyone hurt?" Harry shook his head once. Lupin stepped in, shut the door, and handed around a large bar of chocolate with brisk efficiency. "Eat." Ron took a piece with numb fingers. Hermione obeyed instantly. Ginny looked like she wanted to argue just on principle but bit into hers anyway. Harry didn't take any. Lupin noticed. "It helps." Harry looked at the chocolate, then at him. "What are they?" "Dementors. I know their name." Lupin studied him a beat longer and then, perhaps wisely, changed his answer. "Prison guards from Azkaban. They feed on human happiness, on hope if you let them get that far." He glanced at the wall again. "Physical force isn't usually effective." Harry's mouth twitched without humor. "I noticed." Lupin sat opposite him, still breathing a little hard from the spell. "What you tried was still impressive." Ron blinked. "He punched it." "Yes, that's your definition of impressive." "It did move." Hermione looked between them. "You knew that spell already?" Lupin nodded. "Occupational necessity." Harry broke off a square of chocolate at last and ate it because everyone was looking at him. The sweetness hit like medicine. "What would have happened if it touched one of us?" Ginny asked quietly. Lupin's face tightened. "Nothing good." The answer sat there with all the details hidden under it. Harry looked out at the rain-smeared dark. "And the Ministry put them on a school train." "That," Lupin said softly, "is also something I noticed. When Hogwarts came into view under storm and torchlight, Harry stepped down from the carriage carrying one clear new decision in him. He was done being interrupted by things he couldn't hit properly. He found Lupin after the first week of term and said as much. The new defense professor was in his office patching a sleeve with a spell that had clearly needed practice and patience both. His room smelled faintly of old books, damp wool, and tea too long on the boil. He looked up when Harry knocked. "Mr. Potter, I want to learn the wolf spell." Lupin's brows rose. "That's not what it's called." "You knew what I meant." Lupin set the sleeve down. "You're direct." "I'm in a hurry." A smile ghosted across the older man's tired face. "So I've heard." Harry stepped inside and shut the door. "You saw what happened on the train. If the Ministry's going to let those things roam around school grounds, I want something better than punching." Lupin leaned back in his chair and considered him. Most teachers, Harry had noticed, either hardened under that look or tried too quickly to prove they weren't intimidated by it. Lupin did neither. He just thought. Finally he said, "The Patronus charm is advanced magic." "I'm advanced." A brief laugh escaped Lupin before he could stop it. That was very nearly arrogant. "Only nearly." "Sit down." Harry sat. The lessons began that evening. Lupin did not soften the difficulty. Harry respected that instantly. Patronus work was not strength in the way Harry understood strength. It demanded precision under emotional assault, memory used like a blade. Joy held steady while something leaned over your shoulder and whispered ruin into your spine. Hard then. Good. The first attempt produced silver smoke and a headache that made Harry want to punch furniture. The second filled the office with sparks and set one curtain on fire. The third got as far as a shape, legs, antlers, a running line of light, before collapsing when the boggart dementor pulled too hard at the edge of memory. Lupin doused the boggart and lowered his wand. "What happened?" Harry stood in the middle of the office breathing hard. "It got loud." "What memory were you using?" Harry thought of saying something careless. Instead he leaned against the desk and answered honestly. "Flying over the Quidditch pitch the first time without a broom." Lupin nodded once. "That'll do. You say that like you've thought about it." "I've watched you play." Harry's mouth twitched. And you look happy in the air in a way some people only ever manage in prayer." That shut Harry up for a second. Lupin looked mildly amused by this success and stood. Again. They worked through September and into October. Harry learned to hold onto memory while cold clawed at his ribs. Learned that control did not mean gentleness. Sometimes it meant refusing to let go. Outside the classroom, Hogwarts lived under siege and pretended it didn't. Dementors ringed the grounds like a bad thought. Students could see them from the windows at breakfast, dark figures drifting by the gates or under the trees. Hagrid swore at them openly when he thought no one important was listening. McGonagall said very little and became more dangerous around Ministry owls. The school also had Sirius Black inside its walls for 2 glorious minutes before he vanished again. Harry woke to the screaming. Not fear screaming. Startled, offended, sudden. He was out of bed and into the corridor before half the tower knew what direction was up. Portraits bellowed. Lamps flared to life. Gryffindors crowded around the fat lady's slashed frame in their nightclothes, voices climbing over each other. She let him in. She said it was him. He had a knife. He asked for Peter. That last one cut through the noise. Harry stopped. Who? He said. A 4th-year girl, white in the face, looked at him. The fat lady said Black came through the portrait with a knife and kept muttering, "Where is Peter?" Ron, hair sticking up in 6 directions, shoved through the crowd. Peter who? No one knew. Not yet. Sir Cadogan took over the portrait hole by breakfast and spent the morning challenging terrified second-years to duels while Percy Weasley tried not to have an aneurysm. Harry kept the name, Peter. At lunch he found Professor Lupin in the staff room doorway and said, Sirius Black was looking for someone called Peter. Lupin's hand tightened around his teacup, just once. Then he said too casually, "Did the fat lady say that exactly?" Harry watched him. "Yes." "Interesting. You know a Peter." Lupin took a careful sip. "I knew several." That was not a denial. Harry filed it away. The week got worse before it got clearer. Draco Malfoy did what Draco did best and turned other people's danger into his own theater. He had his arm mauled by Buckbeak after acting like a fool in Hagrid's class, then spent 3 days pretending death was imminent and 14 more demanding legal blood for it. His father obliged. Hagrid started drinking before lunch. Harry went to the first hearing in spirit if not in body by escorting Hermione to the library stacks she needed for creature appeal work and carrying all the books because she'd tried once and nearly dislocated both shoulders. "You could read some of these yourself," she said, balancing another 2 on top of the stack in his arms. "I am reading. They're titles. That doesn't count." "Disagree," she huffed, then glanced up at him as they reached the table. "You're thinking about Black, and Peter, and the Dementors, and the Ministry. That's too many plots at once." Harry set the books down. "Then help untangle one." Hermione did. That was what Hermione did when the world went crooked. She made columns and patterns and asked sharp questions until people either improved or left. Ron brought the Marauders' map into the mix by way of Fred and George, who handed it over with all the solemnity of criminals passing on sacred tradition. "We've had our use of it," Fred said. "And if anyone's going to cause educational concern with style," George added, "it ought to be you." The map was glorious. Harry loved it instantly. Moving names, secret passages, corridors like veins under the castle's skin. He used it first to get to Hogsmeade without permission because the Dementor ring around the school annoyed him, and because if the Ministry thought permission slips were how he'd spend a year, they deserved to be disappointed. He flew part of the way. Not high enough to draw every eye from the village, just enough to clear the wall and the worst of the mud. Ron nearly had a stroke when he followed through the passage and found Harry already waiting by the edge of Honeydukes with his hands in his pockets. "You can't just pop over the wall," Ron hissed. "I didn't pop, I went over." Hermione arrived next and took one look at Harry not remotely winded in the village square and pinched the bridge of her nose. "At this point I'm only upset you didn't take us with you. Next time." There was a next time, and a next. Hogsmeade gave Harry something Hogwarts sometimes couldn't. People speaking more freely because they forgot children had ears. In the 3 Broomsticks he heard Fudge telling Madame Rosmerta McGonagall and Hagrid the story of Sirius Black's betrayal. About secret keepers, about James trusting the wrong friend, about Peter Pettigrew getting blown to pieces in the street. Harry sat in the next booth very still. Across from him Hermione went pale. Ron swore under his breath. "Pettigrew," Harry murmured after a moment. Hermione looked up sharply. "What, Peter?" Ron blinked. "You think that's who Black was asking for?" Harry's gaze stayed on the butterbeer in front of him, but he wasn't seeing it. Secret keeper, James's friend, blown apart. A name muttered in the dark by a man who was either a murderer, a lunatic, or both. Maybe. Hermione's mind leapt where his did. If Black was there when Pettigrew died, he wasn't looking for me, Harry said. That hung over the rest of the afternoon like weather waiting to break. Quidditch nearly did it first. The match against Hufflepuff opened under a sky the color of iron. Wind tore at robes and flags. The stands were packed despite the cold because everyone had heard Cedric Diggory was good, and because everyone wanted to see if Harry Potter would outfly the storm. Cedric was good. Harry liked him on sight for that and for the fact that, unlike half the school, Cedric didn't seem to think Harry's existence was a personal challenge to his worldview. He just nodded before the whistle and said, "Try not to make me look slow." Harry grinned. No promises. The game came alive fast. Hard rain, bludgers knocking spray into the air, Cedric moving like he belonged there, Harry moving faster. By the middle of the match they'd pulled so high over the pitch the castle looked cut out beneath them. Then the clouds thickened, cold speared downward. Harry saw them coming this time, more than one, more than a dozen. Dementors gliding over the stands, dropping toward the players in a black tide while the crowd below broke into panic. Madame Hooch's whistle vanished under screaming. Cedric's broom wobbled hard. Alicia nearly fell. A Hufflepuff chaser gave a choked sob and dropped 40 feet before recovering. Harry stopped chasing the snitch. Enough. He let go of his broom entirely and hung in the storm. The entire stadium saw it. Rain sheeted around him. His robe snapped in the wind. Below, the pitch was chaos. Around him, Dementors spread their empty sleeves and came on. Harry drew his wand, not out of fear, out of anger so precise it felt almost cool. He thought of the first time James had laughed at him in the mirror and the second time in the stories people told, of Lily's eyes, of Ron shoving a broken sandwich across the compartment because friendship didn't wait to be asked for, of Hermione arguing because she cared too much to do anything else, of Ginny breathing in the chamber, of freedom on a broomless dive, of James Potter choosing him even knowing the truth. The happiness hit sharp as lightning. Expecto Patronum. Silver exploded across the storm. Not missed this time. A stag burst from the end of Harry's wand with antlers like spears of moonlight and a body built out of running fire. It hit the first Dementor so hard the creature came apart into smoke. The second and third reeled. The stag landed on nothing, bellowed without sound, and charged through the swarm in a streak of silver that lit the whole pitch. Students screamed for a different reason now. The dark wave broke. Dementors fled in every direction, driven back over the lake and the forest, the stag chasing them like vengeance made clean. Harry lowered his wand, spotted the snitch glinting below the cloudbank, dropped 60 feet through rain and wind, caught it one-handed and landed in front of the stunned commentator's stand. No one cheered at first. They were too busy staring. Then the stadium erupted. McGonagall met him in the changing rooms afterward with her tartan cap askew and a look of contained disbelief. "You do understand," she said, "that most students do not produce a fully corporeal Patronus at 13. Harry was toweling rain out of his hair. "I'm not 13 yet." "That," she said, dead level, "is not the point." Behind her, Professor Lupin was trying not to smile and failing with one corner of his mouth. "Good work," he said. Harry glanced up. The wolf was still cooler. Lupin laughed out loud at that, and McGonagall looked personally betrayed by the sound. The map cracked the Peter problem open 3 nights later. Harry had it spread on his bed under the glow of a single wand light while the rest of the dormitory slept. He'd been tracking every route out of Gryffindor Tower because Black's break-in still bothered him. If Sirius wanted Pettigrew and Pettigrew was dead, something in the story was wrong. Then he saw the name, not in a corridor, not near a classroom, in Ron's bed, Peter Pettigrew. Harry sat up. For 1 second he simply looked. Then he was moving. Ron woke with a yelp when Harry hauled the curtains back. What's on fire? Scabbers." Ron blinked blearily at the old rat curled by his pillow. "What about him?" Harry thrust the map under his nose. Ron squinted. "Why am I?" He froze. "That says Peter Pettigrew." "Yes." "On my bed." "Yes." They both looked at the rat. Scabbers looked back with the stupid vacant expression of a rat who had no intention of being discovered tonight. Harry reached. Scabbers launched off the pillow and hit the floor running. Ron shouted. Dean woke up swearing. Seamus fell out of bed. Harry vaulted after the rat, bare feet slamming stone, and tore out of the dormitory with half the tower erupting behind him. The rat moved fast for something old and pathetic looking. It shot down staircases, under tables, across common room rugs. Harry leapt the sofa and nearly had it at the portrait hole before a crowd of sixth years coming back from late study blocked the path. Scabbers went through their ankles like a bullet. Harry went over them. The portrait swung wide to his shout. He hit the corridor at full speed and saw the rat just ahead, streaking toward the passage behind the one-eyed witch. Then a huge black dog lunged out of the dark and caught it in its jaws. Students screamed. The dog turned, yellow eyes wild. Harry didn't stop. He hit the thing side-on hard enough to send both of them into the opposite wall. The dog lost Scabbers, shifted in a blur of snapping bones and ragged cloth, and Sirius Black crashed to the floor in the shape of a gaunt man with hollow cheeks and a knife-thin face. He still moved fast. Too fast for someone who was meant to have spent years starving. He kicked the knife toward Harry and tried to dive for the rat. Harry caught him by the throat and slammed him back into the stone. Portraits shrieked. Students scattered in all directions. Ron arrived skidding in the doorway with Hermione at his heels, both staring. Black's hands caught Harry's wrist, couldn't move it. His sunken eyes locked onto Harry's face, and instead of hatred there was something rower there. Shock, recognition, desperation so intense it made him seem feverish. "Listen to me," Sirius rasped. Harry tightened his grip. "Start with why I shouldn't break your jaw. Because the rat, I know about the rat." That hit. Sirius stopped fighting for a beat. Then the corridor filled with shouts from farther down, teachers, prefects, too many people. The rat bolted again. Black twisted, not to escape Harry this time, but to point. "If he gets away, you'll lose everything." Harry believed him, not completely. Not safely, but enough. He let go, snatched Sirius forward by the front of his robe and said, "Move." Black didn't argue. They tore through the passage behind the humpbacked witch and out under the whooping willow in a rush of dirt and moonlight. Scabbers was already making for the fence at the edge of the grounds. Hermione and Ron, because neither of them had been blessed with self-preservation when Harry was involved, came after at a run. "Harry," Hermione shouted, "have you lost your mind?" "Possibly." The rat vanished under the roots of the willow. The dog was back before any of them reached it. Sirius surged past as a black blur, hit the knot on the trunk, and the branches froze mid-swing. He changed back on the other side and dropped through the opening. Harry followed without hesitation. The tunnel spat them out in the shrieking shack. Moonlight striped the ruined floorboards, dust hung in the air. Scabbers was nowhere visible. Sirius turned first. Harry hit him again. This time he drove him into the wall beside the broken fireplace hard enough to knock plaster down around them. Sirius's head snapped back. He laughed anyway, a cracked, wild sound that held no humor in it. "There he is," he said hoarsely. Harry's fist twitched. Ron burst in, wheezing, with Hermione right behind him and Crookshanks somehow materializing at her ankles like he'd planned the whole thing. "Don't," Hermione said sharply. Ron looked from Harry pinning Sirius to the wall, to the broken boards, to the black dog hair on Sirius's sleeves, and nearly dropped Scabbers, whom he had apparently snatched up on instinct somewhere in the tunnel. Bloody hell! Sirius saw the rat in Ron's hands and all the laughter went out of him. "There." Harry followed his gaze. Scabbers was shaking so hard his whiskers blurred. The shack door banged open again. Professor Lupin stepped in, wand raised, breathing hard from the run. His eyes went first to Sirius, then to the rat, then to Harry. For one still second, all of them looked at one another with too much history in the room and not enough patience left for games. Lupin lowered his wand. "So," he said quietly, "it's true," Ron gaped. "You know him?" Harry looked at Lupin. "Start talking." Sirius's laugh came back, softer now and edged with ruin. "That's exactly what James would say." The name hit the room like a struck note. Harry's grip on Sirius tightened. "Don't." Sirius met his eyes. Everything about him looked dangerous, filthy, starved, half feral. But the thing in his gaze when he said James Potter's name was not the thing of a traitor. It was grief sharpened into survival. "He wasn't your father by blood," Sirius said, voice raw, "but don't you dare let anyone tell you he was anything less." Ron actually made a squeaking sound. Hermione's eyes snapped wide. Harry did not move. "You know, I was there." Lupin stepped farther into the room. "Harry," he said it carefully, the way people did when they knew one wrong word might get the furniture embedded in them. Harry never looked away from Sirius. "Tell me if he's lying." Lupin stopped beside the table, tired face lined silver by moonlight. "He is." That changed the room, not because Harry hadn't known, he had. Dumbledore had told him enough. But this came from somewhere else. From the buried years before Godric's Hollow. From the lives his parents had before they became bodies in a story other people told about him. Sirius saw the shift and took his shot with the instinct of a man who knew time was thin. "James knew about Nalin before you were born," he said. "Lily told him everything." Ron looked blank. Hermione did not. She inhaled sharply but said nothing. Harry loosened his hold by an inch. "Everything what?" Sirius swallowed once, hard enough that Harry felt it under his hand. "That a man fell out of the sky and changed half her life before she ever met James. That he could fly, could break mountains, could frighten trained aurors by looking at them. That he wanted her to come with him, and when she wouldn't, he kept coming back." Harry's pulse stayed level, controlled, but something under it turned over. "Did he hurt her?" Sirius's answer came fast and certain. "Number," Lupin added, quiet and firm. "Never." Harry looked between them. Sirius's face was gaunt and bruised by time, but the answer in it did not shift. Lupin's didn't either. "Then why hide me?" Sirius laughed once, bitterness cutting right through it. "Because the war was already eating everything. Because your mother had a child with a man the Ministry called a catastrophic event in private files. Because your father, James, took one look at the mess and said you were his son. End of conversation." Harry let go. Sirius slid down the wall but stayed on his feet by grabbing the mantle. Ron looked at Harry like he'd forgotten how to arrange his own face. "Mate," Hermione recovered first. "You need to explain the rat." Lupin nodded once. "Yes, we do." They moved fast then because the night outside was moving with them. Lupin showed Harry the newspaper clipping he'd carried folded in his pocket for weeks. A family photo from Egypt, the Weasleys all smiling, and on Ron's shoulder one rat with a missing toe. Sirius watched it with murder in his eyes. "Peter Pettigrew," he said. "Animagus. Rat form. He wasn't killed that night. He staged it and sold James and Lily to Voldemort first." Ron looked down at Scabbers in naked revulsion. "I've been sleeping with him." "An image no one needed," Harry said. "Harry." "Still true." Scabbers tried to run again. This time Harry was ready. He snatched the rat out of Ron's hands mid-leap and closed both palms around the squirming body. Bones shifted under his grip. Magic spasmed wild and panicked. The rat screamed. Not squeaked. Screamed. The shape convulsed, stretched, tore, and Peter Pettigrew hit the floor in a heap of dirty robes and snot-slicked terror. He looked exactly like what Sirius's hatred had promised. Small, weak. A man whose every line had been formed around surviving by being less important than the person beside him. He took one look at Sirius and crumpled. "Remus," he sobbed, scrambling backward. "Sirius, you don't understand." Sirius lunged. Harry caught him across the chest one-handed. "Not yet." Sirius shook with the force of stopping. "He sold them." "I heard." Pettigrew's eyes darted to Harry, and something ugly and calculating flickered there under the panic. "Harry, sweet boy, you don't know what they've told you." Harry crouched in front of him. "Try me." Peter licked his lips. "I was frightened." Sirius made a sound like a growl. "There was a war," Pettigrew babbled. "People were disappearing every day. The Dark Lord was everywhere. And James always thought he'd win because he was James, didn't he? He always believed bravery would matter more than power, and Harry hit him, not hard enough to kill, hard enough to shut him up and bounce his head off the floorboards. "Wrong opening," Harry said. Peter whimpered. Lupin closed his eyes briefly, as if that had been morally complicated and emotionally satisfying at the same time. "You betrayed my parents," Harry said. Peter's lip trembled. "I had to. He would have killed me." Harry tilted his head. "And that was the line, your life for theirs." "It wasn't just theirs," Peter gasped. "You don't understand what he was then. What men like him do. What real monsters do when they decide you're in the way." Harry's expression didn't change, but Sirius's did. What did you mean? Sirius said softly, deadly now in a way that had nothing starved or broken in it, by real monsters. Peter's eyes flicked wildly from Sirius to Harry to Lupin. Nobody missed it. Hermione stepped closer. He knows something else. Peter's whole body sagged in the instant he realized he'd said too much. Sirius bared his teeth. Of course he does. Peter's next words came out in a rush, because cowardice under pressure often turned confessional if it thought the truth might buy mercy. The Dark Lord wasn't the only thing I was afraid of, he cried. Do you think I didn't hear what Dumbledore kept buried? What Lily begged James not to go after? There was a man from the stars, all right, a man who could split city blocks and smile while governments trembled. I thought if the Dark Lord didn't kill us, that would. I thought all of you were mad, hiding a child like that in the middle of a war. The shack went silent. Sirius's face became almost blank. You sold them out because you were afraid of a man who wasn't even there. I sold them out because I was afraid of all of it, Peter screamed. Tears streaked his dirty face. Because James wouldn't listen, because Lily kept insisting love mattered, because Dumbledore thought he could play both with secrets, because no one was strong enough to stop anything and I didn't want to die. Harry stood very still. It was all there now, not the details, not enough for that, but the shape. James and Lily making choices in the middle of a war bigger than any of them, Dumbledore hiding, Peter folding inward until fear became betrayal, and somewhere beyond all of it Nalin. Lupin's voice came low and rough. James trusted you. Peter looked at him desperately. Remus, please, you framed Sirius. Peter turned to Harry because Harry had become the room's center and all of them knew it. I was going to come back, I was, when it was safe. Harry stared at him for a long second. Then he said, That's the ugliest thing I've ever heard. They bound Peter with ropes and left the shack. The plan was simple enough. Take Pettigrew to the castle, hand him to Dumbledore, burn the Ministry's neat little story to the ground. It almost worked. They had reached the edge of the grounds when Snape stepped out of the shadows with his wand drawn and every line of his face carved sharp by old fury. Expelliarmus. Lupin's wand flew. Sirius moved. Snape's second curse took him in the shoulder and drove him sideways into the grass. Ron shouted. Hermione swore for perhaps the first truly satisfying time in her life. Peter made a wet little hopeful noise. Snape looked from Sirius to Pettigrew to Harry and saw only what he expected to see. Black free, Lupin disarmed, Potter in the middle of trouble again. Move away from him, Snape said to Harry. Number, I'm not asking. Harry stepped in front of Sirius anyway. Snape's eyes flashed. Potter, he's telling the truth. Snape laughed once, cold and unbelieving. Naturally, and I suppose the rat is about to explain the rest. Peter chose then to start sobbing again, which did not help his case. Lupin took one cautious step forward. Severus, be quiet, you fool. Harry had already had a long night, and his patience for adults running on old grudges was gone. You want black so badly, he said. Look at Pettigrew. Snape's lip curled. Pettigrew is dead. Was sleeping in Ron's bed last week. That made Snape hesitate just enough. Then the moon came out. It happened all at once. Cloud clearing, silver across the grass. Lupin's face jerking upward, horror striking through every line of him. Hermione inhaled sharply and spun toward the sky. Oh, number, Lupin folded in on himself. Bones cracked. Snape's expression broke in open shock. Sirius swore and shoved Harry backward as the man on the ground ceased to be a man at all, and a werewolf exploded out of the torn clothes in a burst of snarling muscle and claws. Chaos took the night. Peter changed first, because survival had always been his fastest skill. 1 second bound, the next a rat wriggling through loose rope and vanishing into the grass. Sirius transformed too, hurling himself at the werewolf as a huge black dog. Snape shouted something Harry didn't hear over the snarling. Hermione dragged Ron behind a boulder as the werewolf swiped across the path and sent dirt flying. Harry caught the beast's foreleg in both hands before it reached them and took the impact like a falling tree. The werewolf's jaws snapped inches from his face. Hot breath, fur, rage without a person inside it anymore. Harry twisted and threw. The creature spun through the air and slammed into a hillside hard enough to shower earth. Sirius bounded after it as the dog, trying to draw it away. Get Ron and Hermione inside, Snape barked. Harry looked once toward the grass where Peter had vanished and made the brutal calculation in a heartbeat. Not now. He snatched Ron up by the back of his robes with one hand, caught Hermione's wrist with the other, and launched all three of them into the air as the werewolf tore back out of the dirt. Hermione shrieked once before realizing he had them. Ron, dangling half sideways, looked at the ground far below and said, with admirable clarity, "This is still a terrible way to travel." Harry dropped them through the nearest broken window of the castle's lower corridor, landed after them, and turned back at once. Snape was already outside again, firing curses into the dark. Sirius's bark echoed somewhere by the forest. Then there was a human scream. Harry was moving before thought caught up. He found Sirius near the lake in human form again, sprawled half-conscious against a rock with blood on his temple, and the black dog's torn fur still clinging to his sleeves. The werewolf had vanished into the trees. Snape was nowhere in sight, and the dementors were coming. Not 2, not 10. 100 dark shapes pouring over the water and the grass, drawn by fear, blood, the old prison scent of Sirius Black, the living panic of the grounds. Harry lowered himself in front of Sirius and put one hand on his shoulder. Sirius's eyes opened a slit. "Peter," he rasped. "Gone." A bitter laugh scraped out of him and turned into a cough. The first dementor glided to the edge of the ring. The cold hit at once, more savage than on the train, fed now by everything the night had dredged up. Lily's scream, James falling, Peter's wet coward voice, the knowledge that James had chosen him and died anyway, and under all of it the old open question of Nalin hanging in the sky like a blade. Sirius tried to get up. Harry pushed him back down. "Stay. Don't be stupid," Sirius ground out. "Run." Harry smiled without looking away from the dementors. The ring closed, dark hoods, rotted hands, the scent of the grave and emptiness, and every bad memory trying to become the only one left. One of them reached. Harry raised his wand. The world blurred for a second under the crush of voices. Lily crying, "Not Harry, please not Harry," James shouting for her to run, Vernon's contempt, Tom Riddle's smooth certainty, Fudge's soft-handed control. Then another memory cut through, bright and impossible. James Potter in the mirror, hand on his shoulder, proud. Not blood, choice. And Harry, 12 and 13 and every year before it, choosing back without even knowing he'd been asked. The happiness came like impact. Expecto Patronum. The stag erupted huge enough to shake the lakeshore. It burst from Harry's wand in a wave of silver so bright the ground itself went pale around them. Antlers of burning moonlight. Hooves striking sparks from nothing. It hit the first rank of dementors and drove straight through, scattering darkness in every direction. More came. The stag met them. Harry poured harder. The Patronus doubled in size, then more, becoming not just an animal but a storm front of silver force charging along the shore. Dementors fled before it. Some were flung outright into the lake in tearing sheets of black mist. The light reflected off the water and the castle windows and turned half the grounds ghost-white. Students would talk about it for years. The ring shattered. Cold broke apart in ragged pieces. Harry kept the stag running until not one dark shape remained close enough to touch the shore. Then silence dropped, hard and deep. Sirius stared at him from the ground, breathing rough, eyes a little wide despite everything. "You really are his," he said. Harry looked down. "James S." Sirius's mouth twitched bloodily. "In the ways that matter." Hermione found them first because of course she did. She was panting, mud on her shoes. Time-turner chain still warm against her neck from the sprint back and forth through the night Dumbledore had very carefully not explained, and she had very angrily accepted anyway. "Harry," she skidded to a halt. "We have to move him now." Behind her, Buckbeak clattered over the rise with offended dignity and exactly enough speed to suggest the rescue plan had improved considerably in transit. Harry hauled Sirius to his feet. Sirius swayed once, then grabbed Harry's forearm and steadied there. Hermione looked between them. "Can you?" "Yes." He lifted Sirius onto Buckbeak more easily than Sirius seemed to know what to do with. The older man blinked. "Right. Forgot that. Try not to fall off. I'll do my sentimental best." Harry put one hand on the hippogriff's neck. Buckbeak clicked his beak at him, not entirely displeased. Then Harry looked up at Sirius. The words he wanted were bigger than the moment allowed, so he kept them simple. Don't disappear for 12 years again. Sirius stared down at him. In the moonlight, gaunt and bruised and half-wrecked by prison and grief, he somehow managed to grin like a much younger man. No promises, he said, then more quietly, but I'll try. Buckbeak launched. Harry and Hermione watched them rise into the night, wings beating silver over the lake. For one clean second it almost felt finished. Then the pressure in the sky came back. Harry felt it before the sound. He looked up. A sonic crack split the air over Hogwarts. Cloud cover tore open. Something dropped out of the stars at impossible speed, decelerating only at the last instant with such violent precision the air punched outward across the grounds and sent the lake rippling from shore to shore. Hermione stumbled back with a cry. Buckbeak screamed in alarm overhead and veered. A man hung in the open air above the castle, broad-shouldered. Dark suit, not robes. Hands open at his sides as if gravity were merely a social agreement he had declined to sign. Black hair touched with silver at the temples. Thick mustache. Eyes fixed only on Harry. Not old, not soft, not surprised. Every window facing the lake flashed with reflected moonlight from the figure suspended above them, and all across the grounds people poured out to stare. Harry did not move. He knew that face, not from memory, from the mirror. From the shape his life had been circling for 2 years. Sirius, banking Buckbeak midair, actually looked shocked. Hermione whispered, "Harry," the man descended. Not gently. Not like a wizard landing from a broom. He came down with terrifying control, boots touching the shore's wet stone as if the earth had been waiting for him specifically. The grass around the impact flattened in a perfect ring. He stood taller than most men, built like violence hidden under good tailoring, and when he looked at Hogwarts there was no awe in him at all, only assessment. Then he looked back at Harry and the assessment changed. Something almost like pride crossed his face. Not warm, not safe, but real. "Harry," he said. The voice was deeper than Harry expected. Calm, certain, used to being heard. Harry took one step forward. Hermione caught his sleeve. "Wait." He slipped free without taking his eyes off the man. "You're Nalin." The man's gaze sharpened at the name. "So they told you eventually." "Not much." "I noticed." Teachers were arriving now at speed. McGonagall from the castle doors with Snape and Flitwick close behind, wands out. Hagrid crashing down the slope behind them like a small avalanche. Dumbledore walking at the center of the line with his face unreadable and his power already rising around him like drawn steel. The stranger, Nalin, did not spare them more than one glance. McGonagall stopped dead at the sight of him. Hagrid's jaw dropped. "Blimey." Snape's wand came up higher. "Who is that?" Harry answered without looking away. "My father." No one liked that. It passed through the gathered adults like a shockwave. Dumbledore alone kept moving until he stood a measured distance from Nalin on the lakeshore, robes stirring in the wind off the water. "Nalin," he said. "Albus." The two names met with enough history in them that Hermione took another involuntary step back. Dumbledore's eyes flicked once to Harry. "Your timing remains dramatic." Nalin looked at the silver traces of a fading stag over the lake, then at the scorched grass where Harry's patroness had driven the dementors back. "Your school was letting prison creatures feed on him," he said. "I considered earlier." Harry's mouth twitched. "You're late." That got the first real reaction out of Nalin. A short breath through the nose, not a laugh. Close enough to show he understood the line. "Yes," he said. "I am." Dumbledore's voice stayed mild. "If you have come to discuss regrets, perhaps there is a quieter, 'I didn't come for your management.'" Magic thickened in the air, not from Nalin. From the people around him reacting to a pressure they barely understood. Wands angled higher. Hagrid planted his feet. Snape moved a fraction toward Harry as if he already hated the tactical implications of the boy being between them all. Harry noticed everyone. Nalin noticed too, and his eyes cooled. "Interesting," he said. "They're afraid I'll take you." Harry folded his arms. "Would you?" Nalin looked at him for a long second, and in that look Harry saw it clearly for the first time. Not hesitation, choice. "Yes," Nalin said, "if I thought you wanted to be taken." The honesty of it hit harder than a lie would have. McGonagall found her voice. Mr. Whoever you are, you will not speak to a student that way on these grounds. Nalin finally turned his head toward her. It was not rude exactly. It was worse. It was the look of a man who had spent a long life around people whose power he did not need to respect. Professor McGonagall, Dumbledore said quietly, and she went still. Harry stepped forward again until he stood between the two groups, close enough now to study Nalin properly. The man smelled like cold air and distance. No wand, no visible weapon, he didn't need one. You've been watching, Harry said. Yes. Since when? Longer than you'd like. Helpful. Nalin's jaw shifted once, something unreadable moving there and then gone. I wanted to see what they'd make of you. Harry looked over one shoulder at the gathered staff, then back. And Nalin's eyes tracked the broken edge of Harry's sleeve, where the basilisk fang had gone in months earlier. The mud on his shoes. The wand still loose in his hand after driving off an army of dementors. They kept you alive, he said. That is not nothing. It was the sort of compliment other men might have turned into a speech. Nalin let it stand on its own. Harry tilted his head. You don't sound grateful. I'm not a grateful man. Somewhere behind Harry, Ron arrived at a dead run and stopped so hard he nearly fell down the slope. He stared from Harry to Nalin to Dumbledore and made a small strangled sound. Hermione, to her credit, recovered first. This is not normal, she said. Harry didn't look away from his father. Bit late for that. Nalin's gaze flicked to Hermione, took her in, then returned to Harry. Your friends have courage. They also have opinions. Ron found enough breath to croak. Who the hell is that? Language, Hermione hissed automatically. Not now, Hermione. Actually, Harry said, fair question. He looked back at Nalin. Well, Nalin considered him, then took one slow step closer. Every wand behind Harry lifted as one. Harry did not. Nalin Grayson, the man said, Viltrumite, your biological father. The words landed in the open air over the black lake and changed the night. Ron's face went blank. Hermione went very, very focused. Dumbledore closed his eyes for one fleeting second, perhaps in prayer or resignation. Harry looked at Nalin and felt, not certainty, but alignment. The puzzle pieces did not soften. They clicked. Viltrumite. Not a legend in an old French star chart now, not an underlined line in a ministry file. A man standing on the grounds of Hogwarts like the planet itself was an appointment he might keep or not. Harry's pulse stayed calm. You came all this way to introduce yourself. Nalin's mouth edged, not into a smile exactly, but into something that lived in the same country. Number, then what? Nalin looked past him to the castle, the gathered wizards, the dark ground still raw from panic. When he spoke again, his voice stayed level. That somehow made the content worse. I came, he said, to see whether this world is worth letting you keep. The silence after that could have shattered stone. Harry stared at him. Then very slowly he smiled, not warmly, not with fear, with interest. Good, he said. Everyone behind him tensed, misunderstanding at once. Harry kept his eyes on his father, because I was starting to wonder the same thing. The Triwizard Tournament becomes international spectacle and political battlefield. Harry is too famous, too powerful, and too controversial for anyone to ignore. Foreign schools arrive with curiosity, ambition, and caution. The ministry tries to make the tournament look like unity. Underneath, everyone is measuring everyone else. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised and brilliant, understands something others don't. Harry cannot be beaten by straightforward violence. So he engineers scenarios where Harry's instincts, protect, intervene, take the hit himself, can be turned into weaknesses. Each task becomes a showcase not just for Harry's power, but for his choices. He can dominate, and often does, but the real pressure comes from what other people are willing to do because they know he'll step in. Cedric becomes important here, not as an accessory, but as someone Harry genuinely respects. Fleur and Crumb are given distinct motives, pride, and agency. Hogwarts feels larger, more political, more charged. Then the Portkey sends Harry to the graveyard. Voldemort returns using Harry's blood, and Viltrumite blood changes the ritual. He doesn't come back as a frail wizard in a borrowed body. He comes back terrifyingly viable, not stronger than Harry in straight physical terms, but dangerous enough that magic, strategy, and immortality together become a real threat even to someone this powerful. Main chapter stakes: global attention, engineered danger, Voldemort's rebirth as a smarter threat. Primary antagonists: Barty Crouch Jr., Voldemort, the way institutions use spectacle to hide violence. War comes fully into the open. Voldemort stops trying to overpower Harry directly and starts attacking everything around him: trust, infrastructure, morale, alliances, souls. He uses Horcruxes, cursed territory, infiltration, possession, and terror in smart, escalating ways. He understands that if Harry can't be broken physically, he has to be cornered emotionally and strategically. At the same time, the Viltrumite shadow finally arrives in full. Nalin's superiors have noticed Earth. Harry is not just a curiosity anymore. He is either an asset to claim or a threat to erase. That means the final conflict is not one war but two: Voldemort trying to turn magical Britain into a kingdom of fear, the Viltrumite Empire trying to decide whether Earth deserves freedom at all. Harry refuses both. This final chapter becomes high-speed war fantasy. Horcrux hunts with real urgency, flying battles over Britain, fractured alliances reforged under pressure, Hogwarts transformed into a final fortress, and Harry stepping fully into leadership without ever losing his edge. Nalin's final choice matters. Dumbledore's honesty matters. Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Sirius, and the rest all matter. Harry wins not because he becomes gentler or smaller, but because he learns how to direct overwhelming strength without becoming a tyrant.